The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
Thom Hartmann here with Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back. This is from page 218. The subhead is, If Corporations Are Persons, Why Aren't There Crimes in the Crime Statistics? Every year, the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues a press release on its Uniform Crime Reporting Program, which determines the nation's crime index. It reports crimes by persons, which excludes, strangely enough, corporate persons, even when the corporations have been convicted of felonies. In its entire history, the FBI has never issued a report on crimes by corporate persons, although its reports on crimes by human persons are well-researched and well-publicized. The upshot of this is that when you ask people how most money and property are stolen or how most people are killed, they think of burglars and muggers and bank robbers and crimes of passion. They think of human persons. The reality, though, is that more money and property are stolen by or lost to corporate criminals than to human criminals. Russell Mokaber's corporate crime reporter noted that in 1998, when the FBI estimated robberies and burglaries at almost $4 billion, the cost of corporate crimes was in the hundreds of billions, as it is every year. These include security scams that ran around $15 billion that year, car repair fraud that hit around $40 billion that year, insurance swindles and corporate fraud found on your health insurance, HMO, and hospital billings that runs between $100 and $400 billion a year, 100 times greater than all the burglaries in the country combined. Then there are the occasional really big crimes like Neil Bush's savings and loans scandal that then Attorney General Dick Thornburgh called the biggest white-collar swindle in history, or the actions of banksters and defense contractors that get no investigations whatsoever from either the Bush or the Obama administrations. More people die as a result of corporate activity than because of the actions of deranged killers or overwrought spouses. According to the Corporate Crime Reporter, the FBI reported that 1998 saw about 19,000 Americans murdered at the hands of other people. But that same year, 56,000 people died from work-related diseases like black lung and asbestosis that went unreported by the FBI. And many times that number died from the silent violence of pollution, contaminated food, hazardous consumer products, and hospital malpractice. Much of the human death caused by corporate activity has arguable benefits. For example, the many cancers caused by compounds associated with plastics or pesticides. But the cost of these deaths isn't factored into the unit cost of the products. So there's no financial incentive for industry to develop toxin-free or toxin-reduced alternatives or to use the more expensive but less toxic alternatives that already exist. This is a process, known as internalizing profits and externalizing costs. The corporation profits from the toxins, and the public pays for the cancers, both in healthcare costs and lost productivity from sick and dying workers. It's been a standard operating procedure for centuries and was pushed back against for only a few decades in the 1960s and 70s, with the consumer movement that came out of the publication of Rachel Carlson's book Silent Spring and Ralph Nader's book Unsafe at Any Speed. Since the Reagan administration, however, dumping externalities on the public has become a common and accepted practice across the business spectrum. One of the easiest ways to do it is to simply move the toxin producing or toxin using factory or process to a country with lax environmental and labor laws like China or Vietnam, so that not only are labor costs lowered, but more importantly, the cost of dealing with externalities like workman's compensation from injury and exposure and toxic emissions and death in the workplace, so that all those costs drop to zero or close to it. And then there are the big mistakes. In 1998, one of America's largest meatpacking companies replaced a refrigerating unit on one of its processing lines. Shortly thereafter, the detectors it had in place on the line to look for the deadly cold-loving bacteria like Listeria monocytogenes started to react, indicating high levels of bacterial contamination. The company's response was immediate. Carolyn Smith DeWall of the Center for Science and the Public Interest told reporters Russell Mochaber and Robert Weissman, quote, "Then their studies started coming up positive, so they stopped testing. This company's Fourth Amendment right to privacy blocked surprise inspections by the government." They're a person, right? The detectors were apparently turned off for a full month before the Centers for Disease Control frantically trying to find the source of the bacteria that was killing people, mostly children, all over the United States, used DNA fingerprinting to track the bacteria that was causing the nationwide outbreak of Listeria back to the plant, provoking a nationwide recall of millions of pounds of the product. But during that month, hundreds of people consuming this company's products were sickened by Listeria, and 21 humans died from it. The U.S. Attorney's Office, according to Mochaber and Weissman, said, quote, "There was insufficient evidence to bring a felony charge against the company. Instead, the company paid a $200,000 fine and issued an unprecedented joint press release with the Bush administration's USDA that managed to say that the company had paid the fine without ever mentioning the brand name of the product that had contaminated and caused the deaths." This is truly amazing. I mean, corporate crime costs us more and kills more people, and we don't even talk about it. It's amazing. Anyhow, the book is Unequal Protection: How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, the Congress right now, of course, is grilling the various heads of the various intelligence agencies about did Russia hack into the DNC's mail servers, and did they hand that information off to Julian Assange or not? And if so, how and why? And did they hack John Podesta? And if so, how or why? And was it the government or not the government? And particularly after reading Glenn Greenwald's piece this morning in The Intercept, theintercept.com, where he took the actual document from, I believe it was the CIA, with a list of all the IP addresses that they said, okay, here are the places where we identified where, the Russian hackers tried to get in. And Glenn Greenwald takes this list and compares it to a list of people who read The Intercept, his website. Or maybe it's his personal blog. I'm not sure. He simply says my site in the article. And there were 89 that, as I recall, that were identical. And he's like, is this Russian hackers? No, it turns out that they were all people coming off Tor. Tor is the dark web. And so they're really untraceable. But, we'll see what they come up with and what they find out. And I have a feeling this is going to take some time. And, we'll stay tuned. I will share my thoughts and opinions on this with you. I think if a foreign state actor, whether it's Russia or anybody else, sat down at a governmental level, and this, of course, is what the Obama administration is asserting, and it's why they've thrown a bunch of Russian, I'm not sure if they were diplomats or spies or whatnot, out of the country. But if a foreign government sat down and said, hey, let's mess with the American elections, that's not a good thing. And that's something that deserves to be outed and deserves to be condemned. If, on the other hand, the shoot the messenger strategy that began virtually the day of the first leaks, that instead of talking about Debbie Wasserman Schultz trying to screw Bernie Sanders, let's talk about where this information came from. It must have come from somebody. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, or the curtain, or whatever. I'm mangling metaphors here. But, if this is still part of the shoot the messenger strategy, I just don't think it's going to go anywhere. But we'll see. And I have an open mind on this. I'm skeptical, but I am not, I'm not convinced of anything yet. And frankly, I think that there's a number of members of Congress who feel the same way. So we'll see where this goes. I wanted to talk about, it's just a bunch of interesting things here in the news and in other venues. And this was a particularly fascinating one. We talked about going home for the holidays and hanging out with our relatives and all that sort of thing. And, can you talk to Trump people? How do you do it? What do you, what are they? And a lot of us are like, okay, we're going to go home with logic. I had somebody called the program yesterday and said, in fact, has anybody aggregated all those, video clips of Republicans talking about how they want to destroy Social Security, or, Republicans, doing this, that, or the other thing? I pointed them to crooksandliars.com as a great source of that. MediaMatters.org has also, since they've expanded beyond just criticizing Fox News, has become a really reasonably good media watchdog, and basically a right-wing watchdog. And there are others. But here's where it gets really interesting. And I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about why we have politics in the first place. Starts out, this was a story that Troy Miller, who works on our show, he was one of the writers on our TV show. He's working here over on the radio side nowadays, at least physically, and working on some other projects with us. And Troy sent me this back the day before Christmas, and it was from Science Daily, and it's titled "Hardwired: The Brain's Circuit for Political Belief." Excuse me, that is not the one he sent me. This is the more recent one. The first one, the one that Troy sent me, he sent me on November 29th. And it was headlined, "This is Your Brain on God. Spiritual Experiences Activate Brain Reward Circuits." And what they did, this was a study that was done at the University of Utah School of Medicine. The findings were published in the November 29th journal, Social Neuroscience. And they did functional MRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, a way of looking at the flow of blood in the brain, which is an indication of mental activity in the brain. And what they found was, in particular, a place called the nucleus accumbens, but other parts of the brains that are associated with the brain's internal reward circuitry lit up when people accessed religious experiences, remembering times that they felt particularly spiritual, remembering, or praying, or whatever it may be, that basically identifying, and this is from this article in Science Daily, identifying this feeling of peace and closeness with God in oneself and others is a critically important part of the Mormons' lives. This is the University of Utah. They did the research. And they make decisions based on these feelings. They treat them as confirmation of doctrinal principles, and they view them as a primary means of communication with the divine. So what's going on? So they did this with, 19 young adult church members, 7 women and 12 men. And what they found was that, when people were feeling spiritual, they were feeling very, very positive. It was a very positive experience for them. So this is then followed by the article that I started telling you about, the brain's circuitry for political belief. This is from Science Daily on December 23rd. And this talks about how, again, the brain's reward circuitry and the amygdala, which is involved in fight or flight, tend to become active when people dig in their heels about a political belief. Now, these are nonverbal parts of the brain. These are not parts of the brain that are used to, deduct things, to assume, to delve deeply into intellectual matters. This is gut feeling stuff. In fact, it's entirely feeling stuff. In fact, it comes from parts of the brain that evolved before our language, our modern language, evolved. These parts of the brain predate Broca's region in the left temporal lobe, the part of the brain that through which we both process and understand and create language. And what they found was that, and this was a study that they did, interestingly enough, with liberals, 40 self-declared liberals. And they ran them kind of through the same thing. It was a whole completely different scientists, a group of scientists. This was done at the Brain and Creativity Institute at the University of Southern California. But it's also functional magnetic resonance imaging. It's brain scans, these giant machines. And what they found was that when those people who had strong political beliefs were reminded of their political beliefs or given information that strengthened their political beliefs, they experienced very, very positive feelings. In fact, one of the authors, Jonas Kaplan, one of the lead authors, he says political beliefs are like religious beliefs in the respect that both are part of who you are and important for the social circle to which you belong. He said to consider an alternative view, you have to consider an alternative version of yourself. And they also found, what they found was that when people's political beliefs were reinforced, they felt pleasure. B, they found that when people's political beliefs were challenged, the parts of the brain associated with fight or flight, irrational, not logical, not verbal, but those parts of the brain associated with fight or flight, they lit up. This is why it is so difficult to argue politics with somebody who does not share your worldview, has a different fundamental set of assumptions. Because they have a belief system now that is functionally religious. At least in terms of brain, the physical, how the brain works and all this kind of thing. It's also why back in 1971, when Lewis Powell wrote his famous memo to the Chamber of Commerce and said, we've got to start getting political, all us business people and billionaires in this country, and we've got to start taking over all the institutions of governance. And the main things we have to do are take over our schools and take over our information, circuits, basically. We need to build think tanks and constantly be feeding information into the media to retrain people. So a whole new generation of people would grow up post-1972. Keep in mind, it was in the early 70s when Heritage and Cato and all these other, so-called think tanks were created. So there's a whole generation that has grown up believing that these are the essential truths. But this is the religion. So I find this just absolutely fascinating. I think it tells us something about how or it should, somewhere in here, and I'm still processing this in my brain. And if you have thoughts on it, I'd love to hear from you on this as well. Somehow, to be successful in a political debate, and by successful, I don't mean beat the other guy with logic. I do that on the radio every day, and I'm not changing. Charles Sauer was in here yesterday trying to convince us all that, we don't need Social Security or words to that effect. I don't want to put words in Charles's mouth, but, he's a libertarian, and Social Security is not a libertarian program. And I didn't change his mind, even though I might have won the argument, in your opinion, from somebody who is one of his associates. They would think that probably he won the opinion or won the debate. So what can we learn from religious evangelism, from religious activity, from the way that people debate and argue politics, that we can apply, religion, that we can apply to politics. And in my opinion, the first and foremost is associating with that bond. You know, it's if I'm going to talk with somebody about religion, you know, the first thing that I would say to them and have and do, you know, when people say, well, you know, I'm this or that or whatever, is, you know, I am what I call myself, right? I call myself a Christian. I don't subscribe to a lot of the teachings of conventional modern Pauline Christianity, but I believe Jesus was spot on in most of what he had to say. And that we should conduct and live our lives that way. And when I talk to this magical being, and I acknowledge it's a magical being, right? Bronze Age God. When I talk to this magical being, I feel better. Now, don't you too? Don't we both get something out of our religion? And shouldn't that tell us something about, you know, the experience there? Now, I'm not exactly sure how to translate this into politics. What you're hearing here is kind of my own mental processes. I'm trying to assemble something. I'm kind of, you know, brainstorming this publicly live with you and inviting you to participate in the brainstorming. How do we translate that into a more effective style for political information, so that people don't get their fight or flight parts activated when they're politically challenged, but we can change their beliefs in such a way that they can get pleasure out of experiencing politics from our point of view rather than exclusively theirs, and maybe even vice versa. I mean, this might even be, you know, it's a shame that so many of the great politicians of the 50s, 60s, 70s are dead now. It would be fascinating to sit Barry Goldwater and George McGovern down in a room together and have a conversation about this, because those guys used to talk to each other. They were good friends. And, you know, how can you be good friends and, you know, and like that? I find the whole thing fascinating.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, you know, if you got some thoughts, give us a shout, or, you know, pretty much anything else is, you know, it's going to be anything goes next 4 years. I'm telling you, it's crazy time. And welcome back. Shirley, watching Free Speech TV on the Dish Network. Hey, Shirley, what's on your mind today? Shirley? In Emmitsburg,
Hello.
Iowa? Hi, Shirley.
This is Shirley from Emmitsburg, Iowa.
Hi, thanks for calling. So what's on your mind today? You are live and on the air.
Before I talk to you about what I'm talking about, I'd just like you to know that one of Bernie Sanders' supporters that was at my house, named Rosie, is a cute little gal, and she just thinks you're wonderful.
Well,
so
thank you, Shirley.
That.
Say hi to Rosie for me. That's great.
What I called in about was, have you ever had the book War is a Racket by General Smedley Butler?
Yeah, the first time I read that was back in the 1970s. I'm very familiar with that book.
You're well acquainted with it.
Yeah, in fact,
right?
I used to have memorized the opening paragraph, which was something like, "I was a hitman for the sugar, for American sugar, blood." You know, it's been so many years now. I'm not even going to try to quote it, but you probably, maybe you have it in front of you, and you could even share the first sentence or two, because it was brilliant.
Well, one of the reasons I would, if I were in your spot, I would be holding up the book and showing it to people and suggesting they read it.
Yeah.
It would fit in so good with your program.
Well, thank you. I agree. And in fact...
Now, can I say something else?
Certainly. Certainly, Shirley.
I have a book in front of me here that I've been studying and using called The Grain-Free Cure. Are you acquainted with that one?
I am, yeah. The whole idea of grain brain.
William MD.
Yes. Yeah. The
Have
idea
you ever
that
had him as your guest?
no, we have not. But we've talked about the topic, and yeah, there does seem to be. It's kind of dueling opinions, but grains are not things that we evolved eating. Grains are grass seeds. We evolved eating seeds, but not specifically grass seeds. And the animals that did, like cows, they have completely different tooth structure from us, completely different intestines than us. And this idea of grain brain, that people get a little befuddled, a little foggy in the brain when they eat too many grains, is a fascinating one. I wonder how much of it is associated with sugar and how much of it is associated with grains being processed. I don't know. Your thoughts, Shirley? Shirley?
Hello?
Hey. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, I'm hard of hearing, too.
Oh, I see.
I have problems of conversing with you. But I've been using this grain-free cure, and it worked in several ways for me right away. Helped me with some of my physical problems, and I'm very elderly.
Yeah.
So
very interesting.
It's just a suggestion.
Yeah. Well,
I thank you very much for your program. We've been supporting you in our old small way for about 3 years now.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
We usually listen.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the call. And I'm gonna let you go now, Shirley. But thank you for your call, and give my very best to your friend Rosie, I think you said, who's there, and Rosie herself on it, or Shirley. And yeah, I don't know. I eat a little bit of granola every morning, take my vitamins and herbs and stuff with it. Maybe I shouldn't, but having a fresh bowl of greens every morning is a real challenge. Anyway, maybe beans. We've got an Ethiopian restaurant downstairs. I can get Ethiopian breakfast. I'm going to have to start experimenting. We'll be right back. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.
Okay, one other thing I wanted to share with you, just given that I'm kind of doing this, philosopher of the day rant. Last night, Louise and I were watching Elementary. We've been binge watching this show now for, I don't know, a couple of weeks. Watch one, every night before we go to bed or whatever, or in bed. And Elementary is, I think it's on CBS. We watch on Netflix, but it's, or on Hulu rather. But it's a modern day Sherlock Holmes. I mean, literally the character's name is Sherlock Holmes, and his assistant is a woman named Joan Watson. So it's Holmes and Watson. And in Elementary last night, there was this segment where this guy had 30 days to live, and he said, and he was being accused of killing people, and he said, well, why would I kill anybody? Or he said, words to the effect of, hey, I have nothing preventing me from killing anybody. I'm not afraid of the death penalty. I'm going to die in 30 days anyway because I have leukemia. I want to get into that in a second, right after this, and we'll pick up your phone calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The reason I want to get into it, the aha that it gave me, was this is the answer to that argument that's been going on since the 1600s about what's the essential nature of humans. Is it good or evil? And I am taking the position that Jim DeMint took relative to Barack Obama, and frankly, that Donald Trump took relative to Barack Obama. Donald Trump spent 8 years saying Barack Obama was an illegitimate president, that he didn't even have the right to be president. That was Donald Trump's position, and he did not swerve or sway from it. And even at the, even during the campaign, he was saying, well, okay, yeah, he was born here, but I have this horrible feeling that the Democrats are going to say, oh, finally we can help the country. Because Democrats love to help the country, right? They're, most Democrats, I mean, that's the whole point of the Democratic Party. We're here for the people. We're here for the country. And so if Donald Trump wants to spend $1 trillion on infrastructure, Obama desperately wanted to do that. The Republicans filibustered it. It actually passed Congress. The Republicans filibustered it. And so why, by the way? They did that so that people would be seriously pissed off at the Democrats and at the president. And it worked. Now, the question is, will it work? Because it worked because of a complicit media. Every single time the Republicans filibustered something that the Democrats passed that was actually good for America, the long-term extension of unemployment. Unemployment was extended for, they wanted to extend it for another year during the crisis back in 2009, 2010. You would think any rational person would be in favor of that. The Republicans filibustered it in the Senate. Nancy Pelosi got it out of the House. And by the way, it got more than 50 votes in the Senate, so according to the Constitution, it passed. But the Republicans filibustered it. So was the headline in the New York Times, Republicans block long-term extension of unemployment? No. I don't remember the exact headline, but the story at the time was that, long-term extension of unemployment fails to get enough votes to pass the Senate. Now, my guess is, given how good the Republicans are at manipulating and owning the media, basically, I mean, literally owning it, but also in controlling, what it says and how it does it by virtue of intimidation. My guess is that they will, if the Democrats do an obstructionist strategy for 4 years, like the Republicans have for the last 8, my guess is the media will call it out, whereas they refused to call it out when Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan and Mr. Drunk before him were doing that. But in fact, this hit me over the weekend. I was watching one of the shows, and they had I think they had Jane Sanders on, and the question was, it was Wolf Blitzer, and he said, is your husband going to run for president in 4 years? And she said, Wolf, that's the wrong question. The question should be, what are we going to do for working people? What are we going to do to bring jobs back to the United States? What are we going to do to, and I'm doing this from memory, so this may not be what she said, but it was in that vein, right? What are we going to do to bring families together? What are we going to do to make sure everybody gets health care? And Wolf, had I been Wolf, my answer to that would have been, okay, what are we going to do? But he didn't want to go there. And it suddenly hit me. I had been wondering throughout this election, why is it that the media refuses to discuss issues? For a year and a half, this campaign has been going on, and the media has consistently refused. Most people have no idea what Paul Ryan intends to do. They have no idea. They have no idea what the issues are. Why? I think it's because whenever an issue is discussed, the issues, of course, reflect poorly on the Republicans, because all across America, the vast majority of Americans agree with the Democrats and the Democratic Party. And the media strategists in the Republican Party want to make sure that the American people don't know what the Republican Party's actual plans are, what they've actually done in the past. And so you've got these groups that come out, and every time one of the media organizations actually talks about the issues, they trash them. They trash them mercilessly. And so the media has gotten so shell-shocked over the last 20 years that this has been going on that they're afraid to discuss issues. Instead, they just discuss personality. Remember how Bernie used to go on TV and they would ask him about, well, what do you think about Hillary Clinton's favorability like? And he'd say, it's irrelevant. Let's talk about the issues. And it used to really upset the, poor Wolf Blitzer, right? Because he's been cowed. Well, he's been cowed not to talk about the issues when there's a Democrat in power. We talk about the issues when there's a Republican in power? Somehow I doubt it. But will he go after the Democrats? Somehow I think so.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
When Obama was elected, Rush Limbaugh said, I hope he fails. I'm saying the same thing about Trump. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Can't catch the show live? Want to listen when it's convenient for you? Well, you're in luck. You can find the Thom Hartmann Program podcast without commercials over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I will be picking up your calls in just a minute. My apologies to those of you who are holding online. But I wanted to finish this thought. I thought it was useful and important. So Louise and I are watching Elementary, the Sherlock Holmes show. And this guy makes this comment. They're like, did you kill him or whatever, and he's like, and he demonstrates to them, he proves to them, he's got 30 days to live. He's dying of recurring, relapsing something or other, leukemia of some kind. And he's like, I understand why I could be considered a suspect. I have no fear of the death penalty. But I'm not. And it turned out he was or he wasn't. I frankly don't remember now. But I'm sitting there going, whoa, I just got an epiphany. This is like, whoa. Back in 1634, when Thomas Hobbes wrote Leviathan, he said famously that without the iron fist of church or state, man would revert to his primal nature. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's close to the actual words you can find when you plug Thomas Hobbes and Leviathan into a search engine. But man will revert to his primal nature, which is, he said, without and lose civilization. Without civilization, there'll be no means of transportation. There will be no means of moving heavy objects from place to place. There will be no arts, no letters, and life will be nasty, brutish, and short. And that was the understanding that people had in the 17th century of how humans lived for 200,000 years. We all lived, cavemen, beat each other up. Life was horrible. Turns out the more we learn, the more we discover that life was actually pretty damn good for most of those 200,000 years. And it depended on where you lived. But so he starts out with kind of an affirmation of the story that is told in Genesis, which is that we're all evil. God is angry with all of us. And it's all because of some woman made a mistake, because Eve ate the apple. And therefore, every man born of, and there's all kinds of misogyny built into that story. But it's, and it came out of that culture of the time and all that kind of stuff. But basically the story is, all have fallen short of the glory of God. All have sinned and fallen short and are in need of salvation, essentially. Whether that salvation is religious or whether it's political or whether it's whatever. We can't trust ourselves. And this has become the core conservative argument ever since then. If we can't trust ourselves to govern ourselves, and we all agree and understand that governance is necessary, then how do we figure out who's going to govern us? Now, keep in mind, this is 1634. There were no democracies at that point in time. I mean, there was some small functional semi-democratic states in what were called the lowlands, what is now Holland or the Netherlands. But that was pretty much it. So this was, a statement that in a way kind of justified things. But Hobbes went on to suggest, but self-governance should be possible if we can just figure out who the good people are. Which then led into two lines of thinking. One was from the religious folks. This was the whole John Calvin, Calvinistic worldview. Oh, well, the way we find the good folks is they're the people who God has blessed. Which then leads to the second line of thinking. How do you know who God blessed? I mean, do you go into a monastery and pull out a bunch of monks and say, okay, you're now the president, you're the head of the Senate, is that what you do? Is there some kind of conspicuous visual evidence of God's blessing? Are we looking for handsome people as opposed to people who are less attractive? How do we know? And the answer, of course, that was provided by the wealthy people of the time was wealth. Money is proof of God's blessing. And so rich people should rule. Because people are essentially evil and need that iron fist of church or state. Well, then, 100 years later, in the late 1700s, I think it was in 1748, as I recall, that John Locke wrote his second treatise on government, and maybe 20 years after that, that Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote the Man's Rise from Savagery. I'm forgetting the exact title, but his famous book, about the noble savage. In other words, suggesting that no, the natural state of humans is not to have, nasty, short, brutish lives. The natural state of humans is to be decent to each other. And the few people who step outside of that realm, the people who do commit murder, the people who do commit robbery and rape, they're defective or broken people. They're not normal. And that became the founding principle of the United States. It got essentially written into the Declaration of Independence by Thomas Jefferson, who was a big believer in this, at least as it applied to white men. It got written into the Declaration of Independence by Jefferson. It got essentially written into the Constitution. I mean, it's a founding principle of our country that we can govern ourselves. Now, conservatives to this day are fighting that, both religious conservatives who are saying, oh, no, you need to follow whatever Jerry Falwell Jr. tells you, and political conservatives who are associated with billionaires who are saying, and giant corporations who are saying, no, we really need to just kind of let the magical free market, right, which has become its own religion. But the epiphany that I had was kind of putting these two things together. If Hobbes was right, if conservatives are right, that the basic nature of humans is evil, that the only thing that is restraining any of us, me, Shano, Danielle, Chris, Troy, you, from running out tomorrow morning or right this second and just killing somebody for the sheer pleasure of it, or robbing them because they got something that you want, or committing, raping them or something. The only thing that's preventing us from doing that is fear of punishment. This is the theory behind the death penalty. Right? The death penalty deters people from killing people because they're afraid of dying. They're afraid of the death penalty. Now, that's the conservative logic, and that's the worldview that has prevailed since the 1600s. And it suddenly hit me watching this elementary show last night that this guy just gave us the perfect test. I'm sitting in a city right now, Washington, D.C., of about 1 million people. And there's probably somewhere between 5 and 50,000 of those million people, between, what would that be, a hundredth, 0.05% or 0.5%, who are dying and know that they're dying. And some of them are probably still capable of walking around and pulling a gun on you. So why is it that when people get the death sentence, and it eventually happens to all of us, some, get notice, some don't. I'm inclined personally to not want the notice, but whatever.
Why is it that people don't run out and become criminals? Because they don't have to worry about punishment, right? They're going to die anyway. Well, the obvious answer is that whole conservative worldview all along was wrong. That Rousseau and Jefferson were right, and Locke, and Hobbes, and all the conservative philosophers that have basically come since him. Sir Edmund Burke, was one of the great proponents of the idea that humans are essentially evil. That's why we have to have government. And to this day, that's the core principal concept. It's why they fight things like welfare programs. Oh, people are evil. You give them money, they'll use it for drugs. We've got to drug test those people. Well, it turns out people on food stamps are less likely to take drugs than people who aren't on food stamps. Big surprise. They have no money. But beyond that, I mean, it's still, we're talking 2 or 3%. And that's, I mean, it's just, so I think that it's, I had never had the argument before that I could make to say, okay, if you believe as the core, central, number one beginning point for virtually every conservative argument, even arguments against Social Security, if you believe that people are essentially evil and they're always going to try to rip people off, then why is it that people don't go nuts when they find out they're going to die?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And by go nuts, I mean become, vicious killers or, robbers or whatever it may be. Why don't they do that? Because that's not our nature. It's not our core nature. Welcome back. Let's see here. Marta, watching Free Speech TV on DirecTV in Big Bear Lake, California. Hey, Marta, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I'm so excited about this topic you're talking about because to me, I am always thinking about why we can't have more open minds and why we don't listen. For instance, to people who voted for Trump in states that voted for Obama before. And I'm talking to my liberal friends that we need to show more respect and try to listen to conservatives and, for instance, Trump voters. And you talk so much about neoliberalism and our horrible trade policies, and I think that is a big key to why people voted for Trump. And liberals need to try to understand that more. And I heard one researcher talk about working class people in areas that switched over to vote for Trump and the job flight and communities hollowed out. And she talked about diseases of despair. And you have talked about the horrible increase in suicide and opiate addiction, crystal meth addiction among white working class men. And these are areas where I think maybe you can enlighten me, but I think that you've talked about these are areas where jobs have just totally, disappeared.
Yeah.
Good paying union jobs.
Yeah, this experiment, and the credit for the experiment's not been given appropriately. NAFTA was negotiated by George Herbert Walker Bush. This was a major initiative coming out of the Republican Party. The Democrats have always opposed so-called free trade. Notwithstanding the fact that Bill Clinton signed NAFTA and Barack Obama was pushing TPP, they were doing it in opposition to their party, not in concert with their parties. And people need to get that. I personally know a couple of people who were early Bernie supporters who ended up, I'm pretty sure, voting for Trump around this issue, around trade. And I mean, these are just, acquaintances, people that I, live around, and I get it. And so there's a basis for us to have a common conversation. Yes, we both think that these trade policies that really started with the tail end of the Reagan administration and have decimated the American working class, these trade policies are crazy.
But Hillary and Bill, they were so much in favor of the World Trade Organization, GATT, and NAFTA, and now with Obama pushing the TPP, I think that Hillary did get blamed for a lot of this, and people responded to Trump's promise, and he really attacked that issue, and I don't think Hillary Clinton did. So I think that's one of the key reasons. It's not the only, but I think liberals, we need to model having open minds and be respectful, and then the conservatives won't be on the defensive. Thinking
also, liberals pride themselves on being fans of science, evidence-based, information. Well, all the evidence is, and it's clear, it's undisputable, that, 30 years of neoliberal trade policies, brought to us initially by George Herbert Walker Bush and company, that those trade policies have not been a good experiment. It hasn't worked out. So it's time to do something else. And I'm glad to see that the Democratic Party is jumping on that bandwagon. Marta, excellent points all. Thanks so much for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech. Welcome back, 10 minutes before the hour. And John in Gary, Indiana. Hey, John, thanks for being a first-time caller. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First-time caller, long-time listener. Very honored to have the opportunity to talk with you today.
Thank you,
I was listening to your rant as such on the reward circuitry and the brain and the connection between that as a religion with respect to politics. And I've worked in addictions before before this current career, and I'm actually also a recovering person as well. And I thought immediately about as a solution, or in terms of theory, thinking about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and how in CBT the idea is not to change the belief, but to get the individual to recognize how their beliefs are connected to their attitudes and subsequently their behaviors,
and the outcome of those behaviors,
what they do, and then recognizing how those actions don't work for them,
right?
And looking at alternative actions. So interestingly, and Marta brought up a really good point about how, and you've been saying the party that was going to address trade would be the party that would rule the day, and Bernie and Trump were the two that mostly talked about trade. And I think the people that voted for Trump were the people who were able to recognize that as the thing that was not working for them, and were able to make the choice based on that. So I was just curious as to, based on, when you package it all up together, what you think about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fairly obvious that probably the two main reasons why Donald Trump got the election. Actually, I think the number one reason why Donald Trump is going to be sworn in as president on January 20th is Chris Kobach's interstate crosscheck. And this is the most underreported story in America, that they threw hundreds of thousands of people off the voting rolls, particularly in the swing states. And those people voted on placebo ballots, on provisional ballots, and never even knew that their vote was never counted. So I believe that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats won certainly the White House and the Senate, and probably the House of Representatives. But I can't prove that. All I can prove is that it's there, and somebody should be doing the investigation. But that said, back to the issues that you're talking about, John, I agree. I think that Donald Trump's assertion that he was going to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, number one, and number two, his assertion that so-called free trade and, what I refer to as, neoliberal free trade, or whatever you want to call it, it was killing us. that those two things were the things that really resonated with a lot of people who, I think that, yes, there are people who voted for Trump because they are racists and bigots. They're out there, and misogynists. No doubt about it. But I think that they're the minority. I think the majority of people who went through the effort of voting did so because they want a better life. They want a better country. And they thought that's what was being offered. And in terms of their being misinformed, I lay a lot of the credit for that at the feet of our news media, who gave Trump $3 billion worth of free press, and nothing even close to that to Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or, frankly, anybody else, and including Trump's opponents in the primaries. So, yeah, I think you're right, John. And addiction, and you know about reward circuits. If you've worked in the field of addiction, if you're a recovering addict yourself, you get it, that there are these reward circuits that can be activated. And so, it's an interesting question. How do we access that? And you're right, cognitive behavioral therapy is, the big goal, one of the big challenges with CBD is that this is NLP speak here stuff, but I think I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, John, is that different people have different ways of experiencing time. And that some people can just sit down here right now on, 12:54 Eastern time on the 5th of January and say, okay, I can easily imagine what's going to happen on the 29th of January or on the 5th of February. And, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to be, all that kind of thing. Or I can visualize the outcome of this particular behavior long term. And those people tend to be very good at goal setting. And these are, tools for success. But there are other people who do not see beyond this moment. And right now in this moment, what's sitting in front of me is some heroin or a drink or, whatever it may be that I'm addicted to. And because they're not looking at the next step, which is, ending up laying in the gutter addicted, and ruined, they're not able to overcome that reward circuitry. And so a large part of cognitive behavioral therapy is basically teaching people to walk the timeline, to associate the outcome of the behavior with the behavior itself at a level that is emotional, that is deep enough that it can get down into that amygdala, into the parts of the brain that are the reward circuitry, and help people, and thus provoke the opposite response. In other words, no longer does that. In fact, Richard Bandler did a demonstration of this years ago. The video is probably floating around. I saw it when I was in London with Richard back 15, 20 years ago, with a heroin addict in a prison. And he brought the guy in, sat down some heroin in front of him and said, here's a spoon, here's a syringe, here's a lighter, you're all set, have fun. And the guy was like, seriously? He was like, yeah, you can do it. It's an experiment. And he says, but what are you thinking? And the guy was like, I'm thinking about sitting here feeling, nodding off and feeling really high and feeling good. And Richard said, okay, what happens the day after that? And the guy's like, well, then I go through withdrawal. And Richard's like, and if you were able to do this every day for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, what happens after that? And he says, well, I lose my job, I lose my wife, and I end up here in jail. And so Richard said, now just imagine yourself in each one of those situations. And he tied that imagination to that packet of heroin that was sitting there simply by telling him to do so. And then he said to the guy, okay, you want to shoot up? And the guy said, no, I really don't. And he'd literally cured the guy's addiction. And, with a form of a variation, I'd say, of CBD, of cognitive behavioral therapy. What do you think, John?
Yeah, and what you just highlighted in that example is there's a program I've worked with in doing cognitive work called Thinking for Change. It's a free program that's actually given in the prisons to inmates. Mm-hmm. That teaches cognitive restructuring, and the three main parts of that is the cognitive part, getting to recognize the connection between your attitudes and your behaviors, and how the behaviors or the actions don't work for you, and then learning social skills to practice social skills that
to get the outcomes you want. I'm so forgive me my interrupting, John. We're out of time. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Healing ADD. Richard Bandler, the founder of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, wrote the foreword for this book. And it's basically a book on NLP as applied to people with ADHD, but it's actually a pretty good book on NLP, which is actually how I originally wrote it. So we're on chapter 8 on page 80, Reconstructing the Past. Different types of memories, regardless of how anchored in reality or fantasy they may be, are stored in our brains in different ways. These forms of storage involve the 5 sensory modalities: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feeling, and the subtle gradations of each sense, such as color, brightness, or contrast for the visual modality, for example. These gradations are referred to as submodalities. This is true for both adults and children. One of the ways our brain organizes information is according to the way it's stored. Our senses pick up something in the outside world. Say we see an insect fly by. That's an objective thing that we've seen. However, before that image makes its way to our conscious brain, it's processed by other parts of the mind and tweaked and tuned. If it's a bug that frightens us, perhaps a wasp, then the mind sees it as a bigger object and in sharper contrast than it really is. Other objects in the picture, the background, buildings, grass, whatever, become more distant, dull, perhaps even less colorful. The mind may increase the volume of the sound associated with the wasp and also attach a feeling to the image, probably a variation on what we might interpret as fear or panic, a feeling felt perhaps in the pit of the stomach or the trembling of the hands. So here's a quick list of some of the submodalities that we commonly use to experience reality and store memory. In the visual field, color or black and white. So this is how do you remember things visually? Color or black and white, contrast, size, bordered or not, moving or still, brightness, graininess, distance from us, associated or disassociated. In other words, do we see the scene as we saw it, or do we see ourselves in it? Focus, detail, texture, perspective, dimensionality, is it flat or 3D? Proportion, that's the visual field. In auditory, loudness, tonality, distance, pitch, melody, inflection, location, tempo, duration. Gustatory, salty, sweet, spicy, musty, bitter, familiar, delicate. Olfactory, strong, faint, intermittent, familiar, unique, musty, moist, damp, mildewy. Kinesthetic, the feeling. Hard, soft, cool, warm, sharp, electric, intensity, duration, speed, location. Now here's the amazing part. If you know what modalities and submodalities your mind uses to store a particular type of memory, happy, sad, hopeful, afraid, neutral, whatever kind of memory it is, then you can adjust the memories you have of the past to change their emotional feel. For example, think of something, a memory of something that you did in the recent past, such as brushing your teeth last night. Mentally list the qualities of the submodalities. Your list might look something like mine. I see a still picture in black and white without a lot of contrast or detail. Associated, I see the mirror in the sink, but not myself. No border, 3D, about 2 feet square, about 20 feet away from me. I can hear the sound of the water running and taste the mint of the toothpaste. If I concentrate on it, I can remember, or imagine remembering, the feeling of the toothpaste on my toothbrush on my gum and the smell of the toothpaste. The feelings I associate with the memory are pretty neutral. Boredom might be the best way to describe it. It's something I do every night. Now imagine a control panel just below the image, or wherever you'd like it to be, with levers and dials that you can use to change the various submodalities. Reach out and change a few of the submodalities and see how things change. When I move the picture from black and white to color, I suddenly feel curious and interested in the process of brushing my teeth. It seems fascinating. If I turn up the volume, I become uneasy. As I increase the mint taste, I feel more awake. Nobody knows why this works the way it does. One theory is that the brain stores information holographically rather than digitally, so that the brain sees its own storage capacity as a three-dimensional space. Because we experience the world through our senses, it makes sense that we could organize the mechanism for storing the information about our experience of the world along sensory lines as well. When something is put into a particular space, it acquires the sensory nature of that space, since sensory signals are how we experience the world. So when a memory is put into the boring category in our brain, it becomes, in my case, everybody's different, but it becomes, for me, black and white still pictures and all the other submodalities I described before. When the submodalities are adjusted and the pictures are turned into a color movie, it doesn't just change the memory. It actually causes us to interconnect with or slide to a different storage place, a physical different storage space in my holographic brain. There's also a concept known as a critical submodality. That's the submodality which has the ability to shift others, probably the primary hook into the place in the brain hologram where the memory is stored. As you're going through the various submodalities, changing each one a bit in one way or another, turning up or down the brightness, the volume, you'll notice that there's generally one particular one. It could be anything from volume to contrast to smell to brightness, anything. It causes the entire picture to change and creates a sudden shift in the feelings associated with that memory. That submodality shift is the critical submodality. And once you know what your critical submodalities are, you can do this process much quicker. One of the most common and most powerful critical submodalities is location. When you move a picture from where it is, for example, in front and to the right about 4 feet away to some other place, for example, in front and slightly over your eyes, only a foot away, it often changes dramatically its impact. So it goes from there to talk about how to take memories that bother you or that haunt you even and transform them into things that are simply just who cares memories. The book is Healing ADD, Simple Exercises That Will Change Your Daily Life.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I want to continue along this line of thinking of kind of what is the basic nature of human beings, because so much of our political dialogue is and action are shaped by that belief system about who we are as humans and how we should react to others and how we persuade others and how we accomplish things, how we do things, how do we make things happen. Now, if you assume that everybody's evil, except for the good few, and we can figure out who the good few are and put them in charge, then you probably wouldn't want to be basically subsidizing everybody. But if you assume that everybody is essentially good with the, 2, 3, maybe 4% exception of basically broken people who by virtue of an accident of birth or of circumstances of life have become so wounded that they are killers, that they do need to be separated from society. But if you believe that they're the exception, not the rule, then the idea of a universal basic income becomes really interesting, particularly as we're looking at automation and, they're talking about, self-driving trucks, self-driving cars, self-driving this, that, and the other thing. And it's not just that. Although that represents millions of jobs. But there are all these areas, these companies going, oh, yeah, sure, we'll bring our plant back to the United States now that we've got robots. We don't longer have to, it doesn't matter that we were hiring people for 30 cents an hour in South Vietnam, or in Vietnam, I guess it is now. We got a robot that'll do it now for 10 cents an hour. So what happens when you have a society where there's more than enough money being generated by the society for everybody to live a good life? Productivity is not going down, it's going up. Profits are not going up. Corporate profits this last year, 2016, were the highest in history. In history.
Now, a large part of that is that, they've figured out ways to manipulate pretty much everything so that they, being CEOs and managers and boards of directors of big corporations, so that they can, maximize their profits and minimize their expenses. And, part of it has to do with dumping the expenses on us. Oh, yeah, we'll let little people clean up the pollution after we shut down our coal-fired power plant and declare bankruptcy, or our chemical factory and declare bankruptcy, and we'll just stick it to the state, right? We'll just stick it to the people. Part of it is that. Part of it is figuring out, hey, let's buy a politician and have him write something into the tax law that gives me a tax break, that sort of thing. But the net, the kind of bottom line on all this stuff is that if you have more people of working age, then you have need for those people. What do you do? I mean, we know when the situation is reversed, what happens. We've seen this. I mean, the experiments have been done over and over and over again. The two that are probably, most people would, if they studied history at all, would know are the Renaissance back in the 1400s, as I recall, the 1430s. Some of the trading ships in the Middle East brought the bubonic plague, rats infested with fleas that were carrying the bubonic plague, brought them to Europe, and within a decade or so, about a third of Europe was dead. And the result of that was that there were still rich people. A lot of them died of the plague too, but there were still rich people, and there was still stuff that needed to get done, and there weren't enough workers. So what happened? The cost of labor went way up. And the average laborer who had just been barely getting by suddenly had a middle-class life, or better, the equivalent of an upper middle-class life. And so people went from working 100-hour weeks to working 20 and 30-hour weeks. They formed guilds, unions. This is the era when, I believe, when the Masons were started. And the result of that was that people had extra time, they had spare time to do things like create music and poetry and art and delve deep into the sciences. And that's why we refer to that era as the Renaissance. Well, within about 2 generations, the population had, recovered, as it were. The demand for labor was dropping, and we slid back into, kind of the Middle Ages stuff. But that's one. The other one was after World War II. In the United States and in many of the European countries and in the Soviet Union, in lots of places that participated in World War II, large percentages of the population of working age men were dead or wounded, not available to work. And so what happened was, again, the price of labor went up. But when there's a surplus of workers, the price of labor goes down, and that's when you see grinding poverty associated with work. Most of the people living in the United States right now who are living in poverty work. This is something the average Republican is not going to tell you. Most people on food stamps work. Most people who are getting housing assistance work. They're working, they may be even working full-time jobs. It's just that the pay is so low that they can't live on it. And so we've got to supplement it. So there's this thing called the universal basic income that is like, okay, what is poverty? Poverty is the lack of money. How do you cure poverty? You give people money. If the top tax rate had remained where it was prior to Ronald Reagan, we've seen productivity continue going up since 1980. But average working person's wages have actually declined. Family income has been flat. But very wealthy people, their wealth has exploded. If they had been taxed and that wealth had been redistributed, I know this makes conservatives' heads explode, average working people, would be making in the neighborhood of $100,000 a year. I mean, the math is not all that hard to do. Time magazine did a whole special on this, predicting it back in '67, I think it was. I included lengthy excerpts from it in my book, The Crash of 2016. So if the solution to poverty is give people money, give them some money. Alaska does this with the Alaska Permanent Fund. It's a couple $1,000s for every man, woman, and child in the state every year as a result of the oil revenues. But the principal argument, and Finland is about to try this. They're picking randomly 2,000 unemployed people, and they're going to give them about US $800 or $900 a month, no matter what. It doesn't go away if they get a job. It doesn't go away if they inherit $1 million. It's just, here's some free money. Let's see what happens after a year or two. Right? And Scotland and Fife and Glasgow, they're seriously considering this. But Finland's actually going to do it as an experiment. And the conservative response to this is, oh my God, you're giving people free money. People are fundamentally evil. You know what they're going to do? They're going to go out and buy drugs. They're going to be tracking down prostitutes. They're going to be engaging in criminal activity. I mean, you're feeding the underclass. That's the conservative response. But the fact of the matter is, again, this is, sort of like my epiphany from the previous hour, Like people, when they learn that they're going to die, they don't, suddenly go out and kill people because they always wanted to all their lives, but they were afraid of the death penalty. But here's, epiphany number 2. We already have a universal basic income. In other words, people getting money that they didn't work for. Just free money. And we have had it for as long as civilization has been around. It's just that it has only applied to the top 1%. Matt Brunick wrote this brilliant piece. I had him as a guest on our TV show last night. It's over at medium.com. The headline is, the UBI, Universal Basic Income, already exists for the 1%. And he talks about how, there's all these people, George W. Bush, he was born into the trust fund. He was born a millionaire. Does that mean that, so he's got, universal basic income, right? Does that mean, therefore, that he's doomed to be a ne'er-do-well? Well, for a little while he was, actually, and then he kind of recovered from it and got through it. But Matt Brunick writes, if passive income is so destructive, then you'd think that centuries of dedicating 1/3 of national income to it would have burned society to the ground by now. Yes, 1/3 of national income is going to wealthy people who don't actually work for it. It's because they were, they inherited it, or at some point, way back they had invested it, and here it comes. In 2015, he says the richest 1% of people in America received 20% of all the income in the nation, which is to say 10% of all national income is paid out to the 1% as capital income. In other words, free money. 1 in 10, he says, let me reiterate, 1 in $10 of income produced in this country is paid out to the richest 1% without them having to work for it. The average person in the top 1% receives an UBI, and free money, equal to 7.5 times the average income in the United States. So here we have what could be the new model for a new kind of an economy, a new renaissance. The opportunity for people, now all it's going to take is you're going to have to tax some billionaires and some big corporations and pass out some free money to working people. I realize how difficult that is for conservatives to swallow, but looks like it works.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And ironically, the proof that it works is that it's been working for rich people forever. And welcome back. Rocky watching Free Speech TV in Big Clifty, Kentucky. Am I saying that right, Rocky?
Yes, sir. Hold on. Let me take out a speakerphone.
Thank you very kindly. And thank you for watching Free Speech TV. So what's on your mind today?
I'm a little nervous, sir. I live in Kentucky. There's not a lot of liberals down here.
I can imagine, yeah.
I just got through calling the Republican Party a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And told them about, trying to take our health care away from us.
Right.
And I just kind of want to make a statement. I'm just an ignorant hillbilly, but there's a few good hillbillies down here. But
there's a lot of good hillbillies down there,
the
Rocky.
Republican Party, man, and make complaints, man. Just keep their lines totally full.
I'm sorry, I
And,
missed
what do you
your
think
last
about that?
sentence. Could you say that again, Rocky? I missed your last sentence. I'm sorry.
I called the Republican Party
Right.
and told them how I felt about their health care plan. You know, I got a pacemaker. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
And I asked them if they want. When it's time to get my new pacemaker, man, am I going to have to pay for it? You know what I'm saying?
Right. And, or should I call your office, Mr. Congressman or Mrs. Congressman or woman or whatever it may be? Yeah, it really is astounding. Because, I mean, my first thought when you said I called the, my Republican representative about their health care plan, I don't think they have a plan. Do you know of any plan, Rocky?
Yes, sir. What'd you say? I didn't hear you.
I said, I don't think that they have a health care plan. I don't think that they expected to win the election. I mean, this is a party, and frankly, I don't think that they did win the election, but that's a whole nother rant. But this is a party that is basically built their political mojo over the last, arguably ever since the Kennedy administration, since 1960. The Republican Party has been the party of no. It's been the party of no, we can't do that. No, you can't tax people. No, we're not going to redistribute income. No, we're not going to have welfare programs. No, we're not going to have Social Security. No, and they don't know how to say yes. They don't know how to govern. They don't know how to legislate. They don't know how to put things into place that actually work. And I keep asking conservatives and Republicans, what's your health care plan? And they keep saying, oh, I don't know. Somebody yesterday asked Paul Ryan, what are you going to do after you repeal Obamacare? And he said, we're going to replace it with something better. And they said, what?
5 or 6 different things.
Right. And then you say, well, what are you going to replace it with that's better? And they're like, I don't know. It's amazing. It's amazing. Do you think, Rocky, are your friends and neighbors in Kentucky, probably it's a little too early to figure out that they've been screwed by Trump, but are they starting to figure out that, the Republicans aren't quite on their side? Or has Trump been, with his carrier stunt and stuff like that, has he been able to keep them enthralled?
Well, he got 82% of the vote down here.
Whoa.
But I've got a few people, man, that I've changed, and I'm working hard, and I want everybody else to do so. And that's about all I got to say. We got to fight.
Well, you're absolutely right, Rocky, and that's a good one. Rocky, thanks so much for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. That is the key, I mean, Rocky just nailed it. That's the key, is, we need to wake people up. We need to fight for what we believe in, and we need to let our elected representatives, even the ones we disagree with, know that we agree or disagree with them. And the phone number for Congress, 202-225-3121, might be a good time to call them up and say, so you're going to replace my health insurance with what? We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Scott in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, on your subject of the essential nature of man, I put a large amount of thought into this over the last year, and I think I've kind of figured it out. I'm 52, and this is my theory, and I have a way to back it up with science.
Okay.
So what I've discovered is that I think that people's essential nature, and in fact, the meaning of life for human beings, is to take care of each other. And the reason I say that and can back that up with science is if you look at not the last 3,000 years of civilization, but prior to that for humankind, where we lived in tribes, the way we evolved and the way we succeeded in this world was through taking care of each other.
Yep.
And when people exhibited psychopathic behavior such as murder, stealing, they were expelled from society, which meant death, but that's how society worked.
Yeah,
now,
banishment was the worst punishment. Yep.
Right, so if you look at Native Americans, for example, for 20,000 years, they lived in North America in peace with themselves, and they didn't overconsume, and then look what happened when Europeans moved in, and with our pathology. Our pathological society has destroyed it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my theory, and I think it's backed up with Darwinian, science.
Yeah, no, there's
to take care of each other.
Yeah, there's a large body of science to back that up, Scott. And a book you'd probably just love reading is Peter Farb's Man's Rise to Civilization. It's been out of print for years. Peter Farb died some time ago, and I'm not sure who owns the copyright, but you could buy used copies for 5 cents, on the online sites. And he documents first contact with, I think, 30 some odd different tribes, and goes back to the original records from the 1600s when Europeans first met different Native American groups and described how they lived, how they organized their societies, all these kind of things. And where there was conflict, it was almost always the result of people being pushed from one area into another, most often by climate change, by, relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but, still like the little ice age kind of stuff. Where areas just, they didn't grow food anymore. And this was in fact, the big one was when the Dene people of Canada came south in around 900 years ago, I guess it was, and invaded the Pueblo-speaking, the Hopi areas, and those people became the Apaches, I believe. And it produced conflict. But that's kind of a predictable conflict. But beyond that, the tribes had figured out how to live together. And yeah, excellent point. Scott, you're sounding like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I think you've nailed it. Thanks a lot for the call. Gary in Washington, D.C. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind?
Tom, your basic initial beliefs that you have depends largely on the geographical location that you're born in. There are exceptions to that, but I look at the United States. There are literally hundreds of religions here, denominations, sects, whatever, and the vast majority of them believe in Jesus Christ. They all have different, there's, the Anglicans, the Catholics, Methodists, Protestants. They all have something that differentiates them, because somebody got PO'd about something and they moved off and started a whole new movement.
Sure. Yeah, the whole 95 Theses thing of Martin Luther.
Right. And my thing is, I don't know anyone who has died and gone to the other side and come back and can point to one of these movements and says, that's the one that you need to be following.
Yeah. Well, that's where, the science on this thing is so interesting. We are wired to experience religion as pleasure. We're also wired to experience politics as pleasure or as adversity. And I think that both of those probably come out of these kind of primal tribal instincts of family and clan, of that we're cooperators more than we are competitors. And and being respectful. And I agree with you, Gary, where you're born, the country you're born, not just the country, the space where you're born has an awful lot to do with it. It's with so much, so much of everything. I mean, this gets into even the realm of things like, white privilege and all that. Gary, thank you for the call. Thoughtful analysis. We'll be back. It's 28 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Like these kids who tortured this kid who was mentally handicapped. I mean, these are aberrations. These are not the norms of society. The other path is the study that American psychologist Bruce Alexander did, a study that he did at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, in Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, BC. This was in the 1970s. And I've talked about this in the past on this program, the study where, this is your brain on drugs, right? Remember the Reagan drug war, Reagan amping up Nixon's drug war? And they had this study where these rats in these cages, if they were given water or water with cocaine or water with heroin,
They would choose the drugged water, and they would keep taking it and taking it and taking it until they died. And that was like, therefore, we've got to go out and, like, you know, really clamp down on these drug dealers, and let's build Homan Square in Chicago or whatever, right? And he looked at this and he says, those rats are in solitary confinement. Of course they're going to medicate themselves. In fact, there's I have a quote from him relative to that. He says, they were severely distressed animals, and severely distressed animals, like severely distressed people, will relieve their distress pharmacologically if they can. So he built a 200 square foot housing colony, 200 times the square footage of a standard laboratory rat cage. This is from the Psychology Wiki, by the way. Psychology.wikia.com/Ricky/Rat Park Studies. Interestingly, this study has been replicated. Bothman, Murray, and Wise in 1989 published it in Pharmacology, Biochemistry, and Behavior. Although the Wikipedia page on the Rat Park says it's never been successfully replicated, and it's nonsense. It's not nonsense, and it has been replicated. And, you know, just like, don't believe everything you read on the internet, I guess. But anyhow, he built this 200 square foot, 16 to 20 rats of both sexes in residence, an abundance of food, balls, wheels for play, private places for mating and giving birth. Rats who had been forced to consume morphine for 57 days on end. In other words, what you would think of as a seriously addicted drug, were brought to Rat Park and given a choice between plain tap water and water laced with morphine. For the most part, they chose the plain water. Nothing we tried, Alexander wrote, produced anything that looked like addiction in rats that were housed in a reasonably normal environment. So, crime in Chicago, or crime anywhere, is it a symptom of people? I mean, you know, we're mammals, rats are mammals. We have very similar nervous systems, and you know, we share a limbic brain. If people feel that the quality of their life is not that different from how the rats feel when they're in a lab cage, they're gonna act out in ways that are dysfunctional, just like the rats did. We also know from rat crowding experiments that were done back in the 60s and 70s that if you crowd rats, they'll turn on each other, they'll kill each other. So is the solution to the problem of crime in the United States, and you know, I'm using Chicago as an example just because Donald Trump keeps, and every Republican at every turn, in every opportunity, will point to it and mention it. And you know, as I've said many times, I think, you know, part of the problem with gun violence in Chicago is the fact that Mike Pence's Indiana has super lax gun laws, and people can just, you know, drive over the border and pick up, you know, most of the guns that are found in Chicago came from Indiana. But is the solution to do what Donald Trump is suggesting, which is what President Duarte is doing in the Philippines right now, which is basically declare all-out war on people who are behaving badly? Duarte is killing them. I haven't heard Trump call for that, but it's happening anyway. Or is the solution to go in and say, okay, here's a neighborhood in distress. We're going to undistress this neighborhood. We're going to put in some really high quality schools. We're going to bring jobs into this neighborhood. It's time for a Works Progress Administration, a WPA. The government is going to be the employer of last resort. If no company, see, this is assuming that we don't change our trade laws so that the jobs come back to America. So let's make the government the employer of last resort. There's lots of things that need to be done. There's things that could be manufactured. There's things that, yeah, I mean, there's just lots of things that could be done. We could create government jobs, government paid for jobs. As Franklin Roosevelt said, the best welfare program is a job. People, you know, gives people meaning in their lives. Go into these neighborhoods and say, okay, you know, here are the jobs, here's jobs, here's housing, here's food, here's good education. Let's standardize all this stuff. Let's improve all this stuff. Let's create a reasonable, you know, instead of we're just going to drop people in the middle of the poverty level, let's bring people up to at least the bottom of what you would call the middle class, and then let them launch themselves from there, because they will. We've seen this over and over and over again in the history of the United States. And the best example was the WPA and the CCC. So, my rule.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I think we need to seriously change the way that we're looking at crime in this country. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Brenton, Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Brenton, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm getting better by the day. I hope you're well.
Glad to see you're back. So
Yeah, thank you.
I got a question about ExxonMobil. I don't know if you know much about the company, but I've been doing some research, and I see, they have businesses pretty much around the world. But one of the key things that I found out was that they do their own type of intel, and they have like analysts. Yep. And I was wondering, since Trump is saying he's not going to use the U.S.'s intel, if he would like outsource that to somebody like an ExxonMobil,
Wouldn't surprise
using their contractors instead of our own.
It wouldn't be something new, Brenton. Ed Snowden did not work for the CIA at the time that he leaked all that information. He was working for Booz Allen Hamilton. He was working for a private contractor. About half of all the money that flows through the Pentagon now is going to private for-profit corporations to do a whole variety of things, including gathering intelligence for us. So, if Trump is going to use the intel division of ExxonMobil, and they not only have their own intelligence service, but they, at least according to the published reports I've read, they also have their own equivalent of essentially the State Department. How they have their own foreign policy and how they interact with different governments and different people in ways that, comply with the laws of various nations and with the value structure of ExxonMobil. But
and then also, what do you think about? I saw in the news today that NATO is building up on the Russian border.
Yeah,
something about some nuclear weapons or something. I wanted to know what you thought about that.
It's scaring the hell out of me. Steve Cohen has been on this program a number of times talking about this. He's he writes. He's probably one of America's leading Russia scholars. He was professor of Russian studies at Princeton University for decades. He's written a number of books on the topic. He is the husband of Katrina vanden Heuvel, who publishes The Nation. He also writes for The Nation. And the deal that was made at the end of the Reagan administration and in the early year or two of the first Bush administration, the deal that was made between Reagan, Bush, and Gorbachev, and it was originally, Reagan and Gorbachev put the thing together, but George Herbert Walker Bush and Gorbachev sealed it because the Soviet Union fell on their watch. The Soviet Union didn't fall on Reagan's watch. Was that Gorbachev said essentially, and by the way, there's a movie coming out about this that I've just seen the early version of. It's a documentary coming out of the same company that produced our climate change videos with Leo DiCaprio. Leo's not involved with this one, but where they actually, the filmmakers went to Russia and sat down with Gorbachev and got all the footage and got all the archival footage. And it's just amazing stuff. And the deal that they made basically was Gorbachev said, okay, I will basically destroy my own country. I'm just going to let these states, these nations that we regard as states, go. It'd be the equivalent of the president of the United States saying, we're just going to let the old Confederacy, the old states of the South, we're going to let them go. Right? They let them become their own nations, their own independent nations. Their governors will become presidents. They'll elect their own parliaments. We're going to get out of the business of running that part of the North American continent. And in exchange for that, all we ask of you is that you not put missiles or troops on our border, in any of these countries, and it wasn't all of them, it was just a few of them, that are contiguous with us. In other words, who share a border with us. So, don't put those missiles in Poland because Poland shares a border with us. And, if you'll do that, if you don't let those countries into NATO and you don't militarize them, then I will blow up the USSR and we will and the emerging Russia, which will come out of that, will be a capitalist state like the United States. It'll be a small d democracy like the United States.
obviously it's existed as such for less than 3 decades. It's, and we've been here for more than 200 years. So, they've got a long ways to go in terms of nailing down everything. But it's amazing how fast they've gone and how far they've gone. And that was the deal. And that deal got broached during the Clinton administration. And, I don't know if Bill Clinton himself had even any knowledge of it. But basically, during the Clinton administration, the United States and NATO started having NATO talks with the countries that are contiguous, specifically Ukraine and Poland, contiguous with Russia. And and now it's going to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Baltic states. And this is making the Russians very nervous. When Stephen was on the program last time, he said that right now, with the troops that were amassing on the Russian border, he said this is the first time since Russia was invaded by the Nazis, since there has been this kind of a military buildup on the Russian borders, which, number one, is freaking them out. And number two, that forget about missiles, with just plain old heavy artillery, our troops are now capable of bombing St. Petersburg, and which is just amazing. I mean, can you imagine how America would respond if we had cut a deal with Russia and said, okay, fine, we will, we'll do something spectacular in exchange for that. Just please don't put any troops on our borders. I mean, look how we responded when they tried to put missiles in Cuba back in 1962, or 63, I guess it was. It was 62. We totally freaked out. So that concerns me tremendously. And, that and what's going on with China and the Spratly Islands. I mean, there's a couple of flashpoints around the world right now that I think we all need to take very, very seriously. And I'm hearing almost no discussion of in the corporate press.
Not even talking about it.
Yeah.
They're not talking about it.
No, because it's not the new shiny thing. It's so anyhow. Brenton, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Bob in Ackworth, Georgia. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Good to talk with you again.
Thank you.
Please don't write off the South.
I'm not going to, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
I lived in Georgia for 13 years. Georgia's a great state.
It is. Born and raised here. A couple things quickly. When you get a chance, listen to some of FDR's speeches. I'm a FDR progressive. And in 1934, he made a speech at Georgia Tech, and there's a lot of good information in there on, basically his program. Mm-hmm. The other thing is you turned me on to a book by John Dean called Conservatives Without Conscience.
Right.
Excellent book. I have a degree in psychology, but I didn't follow through with it. But it kind of reinforced what I did learn, making a connection to people. And the evangelical movement is covered pretty well in there. And the thing that you have to be aware of with evangelicals is with their religious beliefs, there's a certain air about them that they feel whatever it is they do, they have God's blessing, or it's okay with whatever. And sometimes that does conflict with our civil society. I do believe in the separation of church and state.
Right.
And it does conflict, especially with the lady's court clerk in Kentucky who refused to issue the same-sex licenses, even though she was a state employee. Her religious beliefs prevented her from issuing those licenses.
Right.
So, anyway,
it's a sense of we've got the one true way, And for people who don't know what you're talking about, John Dean's book, Conservatives Without a Conscience, is a book about authoritarianism and the authoritarian personality. And he suggests, and he cites some really, really good science in the book. And this is John Dean, who used to be Richard Nixon's lawyer, the guy who basically blew the whistle on Nixon. And he's a genius. And in his book, basically, he says that about 20% of the population are authoritarian types. But there are two types of authoritarian types. There are authoritarian leaders and there are authoritarian followers. The vast majority of people are authoritarian followers. There's a small number of authoritarian leaders. And I would say, I haven't talked to John Dean about this since the campaign. It would be great to get him back on. But when you look at Donald Trump, who has never, with the exception of when he was, a kid in military school and when he was initially working for his father, has never really had to answer to anybody. He's never, he's run his own businesses. He's run his own life. He was, born with wealth. He's never really had to have that level of kind of self-control that is normal, that most of us have experienced and learned through our lives, sometimes through painful, most often through painful experience, I think. And so in a way, you could argue that he's kind of the ultimate authoritarian leader figure. And I think there are a lot of these authoritarian followers who are like, yes, sir, all ready to salute. It's a fascinating book, Bob. You're absolutely right. It's Conservatives Without a Conscience by John Dean. And it came out, more than a decade ago, but it's certainly good reading right now. Thanks a lot for the call, Bob. It's great to hear from you. Coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to be checking in on the news in a little bit, and we'll be back with more of your calls right now. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jennifer, watching Free Speech TV in Morrison, Florida on DirecTV. Hey, Jennifer, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I first-time caller. Been watching for 3 to 4 years, and I appreciate all that you're doing and all the information you provide. You're just a wealth of information.
Thank you.
But I do have one comment. It's totally off the subject of anything that you've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Your program seems to be so negative. Can you throw something positive in there once in a while? I know we're going to hell in a handbasket, but it would be nice to have something positive to kind of lift our spirits and encourage a little bit.
Well, I thought a universal basic income where everybody gets free money from the government was a good positive thing. That was...
Yeah, I did. I thought that was a real positive thing.
And I encourage you to check out, by the way, Stephanie Miller, whose show precedes mine. It's Stephanie is, a comedian extraordinaire. And,
Yeah, Stephanie's fantastic.
Yeah.
Not as good as you, but fantastic.
We do different things in different ways, but
yes,
she's very good. I'll work on it, Jennifer. Let me see if we can, particularly as we come into this new year. It's a great New Year's resolution to try to inspire people more than infuriate them. Although I suspect there's going to be a fair amount of infuriating behavior coming down the road as the Republicans continue their little tricks. Jennifer, thanks so much for the call and for your kind words. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for calling in. Patricia in Portage, Wisconsin. Hey, Patricia, thanks for watching Free Speech on DirecTV. What's up?
Hey, Tom. It's hard to get a voice on this particular topic, so I'm intervening. And as much as I love you and watch you a lot and learn from you, I take issue with your assessment of human nature. And that is because I'm a wildlife journalist, and 2/3 of wildlife from top to bottom of non-human life on this planet has been destroyed in 40 years. And 60% of large non-human mammals have been trophy and profit killed out and are threatened with extinction.
Yep.
The oceans are predicted to be fishless by 2048. So I'm not part of that positive spin because humans, I live in Wisconsin. I write a column for the Cap Times. And humans are accelerating killing because of our state and federal agencies in this country are funded on killing licenses instead of general public funds.
I don't disagree, Patricia, and not just that, by the way. We've got agricultural practices, fishing practices that are insane. We have population practices, but wouldn't it be fair to say that the essential nature of humans is good, but some of the bad folks, some of the screwed up folks have taken over? They're the ones who rose up and grabbed power.
Well, we've been killing other species, 70 billion farm animals, and regular and accelerated hunting and trapping seasons forever. So I can tell you that from being a journalist, I've been contacted by trappers who have adopted coyote pups and are completely changed. Like, they're just amazed to find this absolutely enthralling being being raised in their household, changing everything. And if people knew who they were killing, they would love them.
Yeah, there you go. Patricia, I think you're right. And so maybe we're agreeing, because that would be our basic nature, would be to love them. Anyway, Patricia, thank you for your call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you 10 minutes before the hour. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org. And on the line with us, Victoria Jones. Happy Thursday, Victoria.
And happy Thursday to you too, Tom.
Thank you. So what's up?
Well, House Speaker Paul Ryan said today that Republicans are going to put forward their plan to replace Obamacare sometime this year. Now, they're going to pass a repeal bill quickly without having a replacement ready, but the replacement will follow. Our legislating will occur this year, Ryan said at his weekly press conference. Our legislating on Obamacare are repealing and replacing and transitioning. The legislating will occur this year. Now, he wouldn't commit to saying the replacement will cover just as many people as Obamacare. Look, I'm not going to get ahead of our committee process. We're just beginning to put this together. We haven't even got scores from the CBO yet on these things.
Right. My prediction is they're going to end up basically reinventing Obamacare. Most people are totally confused by all the intricacies and whatnot of it to begin with, and they're going to call it Trump Care. And the mission here is not to change our healthcare system or to help or hurt people. It is to eliminate the possibility of Barack Obama having a legacy. These people simply hate the President of the United States, in my opinion.
Very interesting. Well, one thing they do plan to do is to defund Planned Parenthood. That is part of the bill to repeal Obamacare, and it will be included in the reconciliation bill.
They've been trying to do that for a long, long time. So what's going to happen to low-income women who need... keep in mind, well over 99% of what Planned Parenthood does is, helping people, physical health issues, women's health issues. What are those women going to do?
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. In other words, nobody knows, and the Republicans aren't saying.
Nobody has said yet. I mean, he just said that today, so we're waiting for that question to be asked, I would imagine.
Yeah. Amazing.
Major hearing today before the Senate Armed Services Committee of the top intelligence officials on cyber aggression threats around the world. A big focus, of course, on Russia. John McCain is the chair of that committee. He called Russia's hacking an unprecedented attack on our democracy. Director of National Intelligence James Clapper was there, National Security Agency Chief Admiral Michael Rogers, who's also head of Cyber Command. He was also there, and he was asked. Clapper was asked about whether it could be an act of war if Russia was attempting to hack the election. He said whether or not that constitutes an act of war, I think, is a very heavy policy call that I don't believe the intelligence community should make, but it certainly would carry, in my view, great gravity. He was also asked about Assange. They were both asked about Julian Assange, and they both were asked whether they put any stock in what he had to say. They both said no. As did James Woolsey, who is a former CIA director and a senior advisor to the Trump campaign, who described Assange as quite a ne'er-do-well. And Trump, in two tweets today, seems to be walking back what appeared to be very supportive tweets of Assange earlier in the week. Further, one other thing on hacking, a Wall Street Journal report out last night said that Trump and his team plan to pare back and cut back the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the CIA, and Sean Spicer, the incoming what appears to be the incoming spokesperson for Trump, is saying it's 100% false. This report, saying that all talks are tentative, and Trump's main commitment is keeping America safe. All transition activities are for information gathering purposes, and all discussions are tentative.
What does that mean? Don't take us seriously?
I think that, well, the Wall Street Journal is a very good newspaper and tends to be rather good.
Yeah.
I think that maybe this story got out ahead of.
Yeah, that would make sense. That would make sense because
it got out.
It seems unlikely that they would the subtext of what they would be saying is, please don't pay any attention to anything we say.
Right. Several House Democrats are weighing a formal challenge to Donald Trump's election tomorrow, Friday, when Congress meets in joint session to certify Trump's Electoral College victory.
Tell me about this.
Jamie Raskin of Maryland, Bobby Scott of Virginia, Ed Perlmutter of Colorado among a group of Democrats. Now, they've got the right to lodge the protest when Congress officially counts the electoral votes. But if the protests are going to have any effect, they need to secure the backing of at least one senator. And it's not clear whether any Senate Democrats are weighing a similar challenge.
What's the basis of the challenge?
The basis of the challenge appears to be they've got different reasons. They're saying they've been encouraged by progressive groups who describe three grounds: foreign interference by Russia in the election, voter suppression, and the more technical claim that dozens of electors of both parties were ineligible to serve.
Interesting. So are they suggesting that we should redo the election?
Well, they don't seem to have gone that far. I think they know they're not going to get anywhere with it.
Yeah. So this is basically just, a protest.
It's protest.
Good on them. I mean, protest is a good thing.
The State Department has sanctioned Hamza bin Laden, son of Osama bin Laden and a member of al-Qaeda, by naming him a specially designated global terrorist today.
Oh, sweet.
Now, he was initially reported dead in the raid in Pakistan that killed bin Laden, but he actually escaped. He will be denied access to the American financial system, which I think probably came as a surprise to many people who probably thought he already was denied access to it.
Wait a minute. Bin Laden's son, the head of, has been, oh, man. Okay,
yeah,
anyhow.
Apparently he had access to the American financial system, yeah.
Yeah, so he's got to pull his money out of whatever the bank is.
Well, they're denying him access to it now.
Yeah.
Senate Democrats today called for an ethics investigation of Representative Tom Price, Republican of Georgia, before his nomination for Health and Human Services Secretary goes forward. They want an Office of Congressional Ethics probe of his trading of medical stocks while in Congress. The Wall Street Journal reported last month that Price traded more than $300,000 in health stocks while also sponsoring health care legislation.
Now, that's legal, is it not?
Well, they're saying they don't know, but they need an ethics investigation to find out.
Yeah, I thought Congress had carved out for themselves an exemption from the insider trading rules.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, is saying every American should be shocked by this.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty horrible thing, and it shouldn't be happening. But I remember, years ago when this first came to light, that there was all this sturm and drang about let's do something about it. In fact, Nancy Pelosi got legislation in 2009 to do something about it, but I'm pretty sure it got filibustered by the Republicans. Fascinating stuff. Victoria, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. And thank you. We'll be back. Stick around. Coming up on the top of the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Bob Ney's book, Sideswiped, Lessons Learned Courtesy of the Hitmen of Capitol Hill. Bob was the only member of Congress. He was a Republican congressman. In fact, he was the guy who invented the phrase freedom fries. That far right, yes. He was the only member of Congress who spoke Farsi, which is the language they speak in Iran. The Iranian government, during the Bush administration, George W. Bush, sent a letter to, or delivered a letter to Bob in Farsi, because he spoke Farsi, saying that they were willing to recognize Israel and stop their nuclear program in exchange for recognition by the United States. Bob delivered that to the Bush White House. And within a short time, Bob found himself in a federal prison. And that letter never surfaced, and that rapprochement never happened. It's an amazing story. It's too long to read as an excerpt, but it's in the book. And, that was the end of Bob's political career. Now he's working for Talk Media News. But this is from chapter 17 of his book. It's titled Political Strong-Arming. I had a major blowout over the Head Start program with Andy Card, President George W. Bush's chief of staff. The first of the legislation debates centered on Head Start. John Boehner was doing his best to acquire votes to hurt the program. I had supported Head Start for years as an Ohio State senator and again as a U.S. congressman. When George Bush became president, however, every issue, including this one, was treated as though, if lost, it would be the end of the world, as if winning were vital to save the presidency. Speaker Hastert became a lapdog for President Bush. Didn't matter whether it was overspending, crushing unions, or ripping the legs out from under Head Start. Hastert acted like the president ran the House instead of the other way around. I found myself under intense pressure to vote against Head Start. I was bombarded by all sides, Tom DeLay, Hastert's staff, and the chairman of the Education Committee, which at the time was John Boehner. I found it amazing that a sitting president would make a do-or-die issue over taking money away from poor children who needed a jump on school, a Head Start. Anyone in the field of education knew that Head Start had a rocky beginning, but it had proven to be statistically and socially a very fine program, and I had always supported it. I had a private hideaway, an office the Speaker gives to leaders and long-term older members of Congress that very few people knew about. Even Brian Walsh, my press secretary, was unaware. On this particular evening, I was in that Capitol hideaway, one floor directly below the chamber. I was sick and tired of being lobbied and bullied on this vote. I had to escape the arm twisting. I used to say it was so bad that you could hear the bones snap on the floor of the House. My private phone in the hideaway was ringing, so I knew that only Ted Vander Meade of the Speaker's office could have given it out. Chris Kruger, my executive assistant, answered it and signaled me that it was Andy Card, the White House chief of staff. Andy said, "We need this Head Start vote. It's critical to the Bush administration's future." I was stunned at this. The entire future of the Bush administration was predicated on beating up on little unfortunate kids by taking away their Head Start funding. I thought this was idiocy and stupid politics. I said, I have always supported Head Start over my entire career. I don't like this vote, and I just cannot help you. Card blew up at me and responded with, "Let me make this clear. Boehner said you were a vote for us, and we are holding you to that." I don't know where Boehner got that from, I said. I can rethink this, but I don't like it, and I'm sure I will not change my mind. Andy then said, "You are an effing liar," only he spells out the word. And I said, "F you, Andy, and your idiotic administration." And I hung up on him. I went to the floor of the House where Boehner confronted me. I told him, "Andy is disrespectful, way out in left field on this. He can kiss my ass and F him, period."
Boehner continued to strong-arm me. They were one vote short. It boiled down to the fact that this vote was so hideous, so wrong, that they simply could not get the votes. One of my best friends in Congress, Steve LaTourette, took a bullet for me on this to move the bill along. He told him to back off on me, and he would help through the process in the House, but not necessarily if or when the vote came back from the Senate. The second time Andy Card ran afoul of Congress, he had to confront Congressman Steve LaTourette. Steve was one of the finest members of Congress, very brave in his positions, an independent thinker, good at politics, and no wallflower. He's conservative on some issues, but he cares deep down about working people and how they survive in America. At this writing, Steve has left Congress, frustrated with the lack of acceptance of moderates within the Republican Party. Andy Card decided that he wanted to remove Davis-Bacon, a federal law that requires payment of prevailing wages to workers on public works projects, from the Transportation Appropriation Bill. Don Young was a strong transportation chairman and let LaTourette take the lead on the issue. I dug into Andy's history and found some interesting things. He'd been a Massachusetts state rep. He'd worked for President Bush's father, Bush 41. When Bush 41 lost to Clinton, Andy felt that the transportation bill had done the president no good, and he disliked labor unions, and he disliked unions in general. We all kept up a tough front. Transportation unions lobbyist for the building trades, like Tim James, was very effective and helped the labor Republicans push back. Bush 43, though, kept putting up roadblocks at every step. He simply did not want a transportation bill that might support the unions. John Mica, Transportation Subcommittee Chair, during a private Republican caucus meeting, made the best statement of the day. John said, "Hell, the president doesn't think we need a bill. As he travels in cities by car, they stop all the traffic for his motorcade. He thinks there are no traffic problems. The streets are deserted." We all howled. So anyhow, there's just all these amazing inside stories about how Congress actually works. It's pretty grim. The book Sideswiped by Bob Ney.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm very pleased to have with us today Herbert Whitehouse. He is an attorney. He's an expert on the fiduciary role of government. He led the team at Johnson & Johnson, J&J, the large company that introduced the 401k to corporate America. You can tweet him at Herb Whitehouse, H-E-R-B Whitehouse, just like it sounds. And Mr. Whitehouse, welcome to the program.
Yes, Tom, thanks for calling.
Thanks for joining us. I understand you were involved back in 1981 with the introduction of 401ks. At that point in time, the conventional wisdom was that retirement was a combination of Social Security, of the pension that you got from your workplace, and then whatever equity you'd been able to accumulate throughout your life. Typically, for middle-class Americans, it was their home equity. Or retirement savings. And that was the kind of three-legged stool. Whence came the 401k?
Well, first of all, on that three-legged stool, that was very, very true for large companies. It might not be true for everybody, but that was the large company pattern. And then I found the Revenue Act of 1978 as a manager of executive compensation at J&J, looking for deferred compensation provisions, and said this could be a benefit plan for everybody. And
in other words, this was a piece of legislation that was written basically to allow rich people to defer taxes until later years when they had lower incomes on income that they wanted to set aside,
or to regulate it.
Right.
It was there, but Congress was addressing that kind of deferred compensation and didn't know that they had created what's now known as the 401k plan.
Huh. And so go ahead.
We had to talk to the IRS, convince them that it was true, and then I proposed it to the J&J board. And actually, the first comment that I got was from the Exxon member of the board who said, impossible. It's not true. If it was, my tax counsel would have told me. So it was brand new.
Mm-hmm. And your idea was basically to allow this, to the accumulation of tax deferred savings that wealthy people were enjoying, that the executives in major companies were enjoying, to be available to all working people in the country. It sounds like a noble thing. In retrospect, though, it seems not to have worked out so well. What happened?
Well, it worked very well for people who used it, and I think there's a couple of problems. One is that not enough people are using it when there is a plan, and the other thing is that there's a feeling that it works so well that 401k was the cause of companies abandoning this three-legged stool and moving from defined benefit plans all to the 401k defined contribution plan,
right.
and so its own success is the reason that a lot of people have misgivings or wondering what's happened to this old pattern of a three-legged stool.
Yeah, I remember back in the 80s, there were people who were criticizing the Reagan administration for promoting, I thought they were called IRAs at the time, but 401ks, whatever it may be, criticizing these programs and saying this was the camel's nose under the tent, under the edge of the tent, in the direction of doing away with Social Security, even. That it wouldn't just be companies doing away with pensions, that eventually we would be saying to working people, if you didn't put money in your 401k, tough luck. And and it seems like there's actually a constituency for that kind of thinking, that is represented by the Paul Ryans of the world.
Yeah, 401k became so successful that it was used as a model for replacing the unfunded liabilities of Social Security with a defined contribution plan. And I think there's some real problems with that, because you need a balance of this defined benefit and the defined contribution.
Right.
One problem is that only a third of our economy is represented in the capital markets. And if you had all the notational savings of Americans that goes into the Social Security system invested in stocks and bonds, it would really disrupt that capital market system. It just couldn't handle it.
So it would be a bad thing to privatize Social Security.
I think it would be. 401k is good, but it's not the model that should replace Social Security.
Right.
And the other reason is that a lot of individuals don't really know how to invest. And we've come a long ways in helping people, and that's a real positive on the 401k. But in my mind, the kinds of things that I do, say, as either when I was in the consulting world or I'm a general counsel, in-house counsel for ABC Fine Wine and Spirits here in Florida. And we have a program where we help people to decide what portfolios they want. And that works much better than having a government DMV office help you, in my opinion.
Yeah, or having nobody help you, which is what most people are kind of stuck with. And I read a statistic a while back that said that as somebody who started putting money into a 401k in their 20s, by the time they retired in their 60s, would have spent over $100,000 in fees to banks for managing those 401ks. There's a big parasitic piece to this, is there not?
I think there is, and I've heard people say we should have a national program because of the cost and the parasitic nature of investment advisors and brokers and mutual funds who are trying to get money. But we have a fiduciary system, And my response is, if the fees are too high, the fiduciary should go to ERISA jail.
Yeah. Well, but the problem is that there's no law against it. I mean, the Democrats have proposed this numerous times, just in the past 5 years, to say investment advisors have to have a fiduciary responsibility. They have to either disclose to their clients when they are giving them advice that is not in the best interest of the client, but might be in the best interest of the advisor, or simply not do that. Only give them the best advice that they have. But right now, you can take your 401k money to an investment advisor and say, here, please invest this for me. And they can rip you off, basically. And there's no law to prevent that outside of just patent naked fraud, is there?
Well, there is ERISA, and ERISA has this fiduciary duty. But you're right.
But that's institutional.
Even the fiduciary committee is in a better position than an individual to deal with that kind of situation. But still, there are unsophisticated small companies who are setting up a 401k with all good intentions, and they may have somebody come to them and say, we'll be your advisor, but they're really not acting in the interest of the employees.
Yeah.
But I think it's not that hard, and fiduciaries need to know, the executives of the small companies who do this. Large companies know this, but at least most of them. They need to know that they've got to look around and find low-cost administration, low-cost funds. One of my pet peeves is that advisors and companies thought they could just set up a 401k plan, put in 10, 12. In the public sector, it might be 150 funds, and you say to the Joe Bolt, okay, figure out how to put together a portfolio.
Right. But hang on just a second here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm sorry we're out of time for the conversation. It's fascinating. Herbert Whitehouse, attorney, fiduciary, government expert. You can tweet him at Herb, H-E-R-B, Whitehouse. Thank you, sir, for being with us today.
Okay, sure.
Welcome back. It's fascinating. So, like David Stockman, came out of that era and kind of apologized for Reaganomics. And now, it's people going, maybe these weren't such great ideas. Remarkable stuff. Richard in Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Tom, thank you. I just want to double check with you on Hillary winning the election. From watching your program, I've gathered 4 points. The first one is the cross-check situation. I want to ask you, have you fact-checked that? I mean, even like looking at Snoops or something?
Yeah.
I haven't, so I don't.
Yes.
I mean, do you know that article was accurate and correct?
The article that Greg Palast wrote in Rolling Stone in mid-August saying that the election was already decided. Yeah, I haven't fact-checked it in as much as I've gone to the individual secretaries of state myself. But Greg just came out with a movie called The Best Money Democracy Can Buy that you can watch for $3 on Amazon. And in that movie, he physically goes to these states, presents the list. In fact, he tracked down Chris Kobach, the guy who started it. And he says to Chris Kobach, how come Jimmy John Jones and Jimmy James Jones you're saying they're the same person and they should both be thrown off the voting rolls when they have different middle names? And Kobach tries to turn around and walk away from him. But, I think he's nailed it solid.
Oh, okay. Had that happened in another country, the election would have been void right now.
You're right.
Number 2, the only recount was the Wisconsin recount, and that was not a hand count. From watching your program,
right.
I gather they just punched a button on the machines and got a number. There was no actual hand count of the ballots.
Plus, they never opened the ballots, the provisional ballots that people voted thinking they were voting, who had been removed from the voting rolls via cross-check.
Okay, but also they really didn't hand count the machine vote.
That's largely true. Yeah, there were some places where they did. Yeah.
So that's number two. Number three is the Russian influence. On today's hearing, McCain, early on, McCain's questioning, and one of the people implied that there was more than just this hacking situation. There was a American-Russian interaction.
Right. There was an explicit
follow up on it. He kind of stopped the guy and said, "Well, we just want to deal. You know, we're just here for the hacking."
Well, there was one point. I saw this morning. I watched part of the hearings where one of the questioners, and I'm sorry I don't remember who it was, asked, I believe it was Director Clapper, he asked him, was there any evidence that Russia or any other country actually changed any vote totals in the United States? And the answer was no, there was no evidence of that. So.
Okay, well, there were not direct vote. No. What I'm saying is what I heard implied was, well, specifically that some members of the Republican Party had interacted with someone in Russia.
Oh,
that's kind of implied.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, that would probably be Paul Manafort, but who knows? Yeah. And you had a fourth one you wanted to make real quick, Richard? We got about 10 seconds.
Oh, okay. What happens, is this so bad that our country is not pursuing it because it would ruin the country?
That's a damn good question. I don't know the answer to it, and I can't figure out, Richard, why the press is not all over this. Thanks a lot for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's 2 minutes past the hour. And Troy in Blue Jacket, Oklahoma. Hey, Troy. Thanks for being a first-time caller. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I was just listening to the previous caller.
Herb Whitehouse, the guy who kind of brought us for the 401k. It's interesting, isn't it, how, David Stockman has come out and apologized for Reaganomics, and Herb Whitehouse is coming out and saying, yeah, the 401k, it was an interesting idea, but... Yeah, anyhow, back to you. I'm sorry, Tom. Or Troy.
Well, because of circumstances, my mom passed away in August of last year, and so in handling her estate and stuff, I did some homework and started looking into her investments, and I came to the realization that these fiduciary systems or people, money managers or whatever, aren't looking out for our interests. They're actually trying to take the money that my mom and dad had worked hard all their life for.
Yep.
And because of it wasn't a straight 3% fee, but between a rider and this and different percentages, it totaled to 3% a year just in fees.
Wow.
And so
every year, 3%. That's incredible.
Yeah. And so I talked to a tax person, and I talked to other money managers and stuff, and what they told me is not what they tell you, it's what they don't tell you.
Yep.
And be careful, and just so I just want people out there to know that to check their portfolio, see what they're getting involved, see what they're investing in.
Yep.
My mom was very conservative when it came to that because, she didn't want to lose anything. So most of her was in cash and bonds.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to liquidate the account. The guy was all, well, that's 3%. That's because of stock market. We've been on a straight line low. And I said, but it was a cash account. There was no investment.
Troy, your phone is breaking up.
He didn't know what to say when I told him it was a cash account.
Right.
And so, anyway, I liquidated the account, and I'm just now.
Yeah. You're trying to warn folks. Troy, this is something that just blows my mind. And thank you very much for the call, Troy. I really appreciate it. That in the United States right now, If you've got a little bit of money set aside, or you've been saving your money, you've been doing what they tell you you're supposed to do. You created your company has a 401k, you created your very own IRA, or you even take after-tax savings, and open an account with whatever, fill in the blank, some company, and say to them, here's my future. This is what I intend to retire on. Please invest it well for me. That they have no legal obligation to do that. They can lie to you. They can, lying might be actually a little more difficult. They can lie by omission. They can neglect to tell you things. Like they can neglect to tell you that they're being paid a big commission by this particular fund that we're going to put your money in, whereas it would be a much smaller commission if we put it in this other fund. They can just neglect to tell you that. It's not information you need to know. And so basically we have a financial services industry in the United States led by the big banks, but there's a bunch of big finance companies as well. And a lot of small folks out there presenting themselves as investment advisors who are hustlers and who are ripping us off. And here's where it gets really interesting, is every time there's one political party that keeps trying to pass a law saying that if you are an investment advisor, if you are handling other people's money, you do have a fiduciary responsibility. You do have a legal responsibility to do what's best for your client, not for yourself. When those two things come into conflict. I mean, it's great to do what's best for your client and for yourself. That's how it's supposed to work out, right? You get paid $50 an hour for the work you're doing, and the work that you happen to be doing is investing this guy's money so that he's, getting a much better return than the $50 he paid for the advice that you gave or whatever it would be. But that's not the case. And one political party in this country keeps trying to make it so that people's savings are safe. And the other political party in this country keeps fighting those efforts. Why? Why does the Republican Party consistently fight any efforts to regulate the financial services industry? Why is it that they even want to do away with Dodd-Frank and in particular the part of Dodd-Frank that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, that has recovered billions of dollars from small investors that had been ripped off largely by big banks? Why is it that the Republican Party is virtually unanimous in wanting to defend investment advisors who are basically thieves, who are hustlers, who are charlatans? Why? Is it some like moral corruption? Is it that they get big contributions from that industry? Is it all of the above? Is it that they believe that they genuinely believe that the best system is a completely unregulated system? If they really believe that, would they go into a hospital that has absolutely no rules or regulations? Would they eat in a restaurant where there's no food standards, cleanliness standards? I mean, the list goes on and on, but I just, if nothing else, I mean, there's so many issues out there that we can talk about, but if there's nothing else that draws a really bright contrast between Democrats and Republicans, this is it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls right after. Did you see this thing? The scientists over at the Energy Department, they're scrambling to preserve the scientific data that they have. In fact, Jerry Brown, one of the things that was said during the campaign, or one of the incoming Trump people, is that they want to shut down the NASA satellites that are monitoring the temperature of the planet. Now, this is a variation on what Sam Brownback did in Kansas. Sam Brownback in Kansas said, we're going to do this great Reaganomics experiment. I still believe in Reaganomics, even though it's screwed the country. I think that it's real. This trickle-down economics, this theory, this crazy theory that Steve Moore and Alvin Lafler came up with I think it's real, and we're going to do this in Kansas, home of the Koch brothers. We're going to dramatically cut the taxes on our millionaires and billionaires in Kansas, which is going to drop the state revenue dramatically. And we're going to cut funding. We're going to cut spending in the state of Kansas. And so we're going to cut aid to education. We're going to cut aid to poor people. We're going to cut aid to, we're just going to right across the board. And you will see, as a result of these lower taxes and fewer regulations and less, welfare, as it were, you'll see that Kansas is going to become the most vibrant economy in the entire United States. And Sam Brownback even assigned a special office, a special guy in a special office to simply day-to-day keep track of the economic statistics, proving that his experiment was working. Well, that was 2 or 3 years ago. The experiment's been a disaster. Kansas, and Bobby Jindal was doing the same thing in Louisiana for a different reason. Brownback was doing it because he's an ideologue. Bobby Jindal was doing it because he wants to become president. And so he figured if he, and Reagan is the great god of the Republicans. So if he did Reaganomics in Louisiana, in a big way, that, Louisiana, at least he'd be able to campaign for president that he had done this thing. And he created such a disaster in Kansas that this incredibly red state elected a Democratic governor to replace him. I mean, they were so sick of it. But what Sam Brownback did in Kansas is when the news started coming down that the state was sinking and sinking and sinking, mortality rate was going up, deaths were going up, childhood diseases were going up, educational outcomes were going down, suicide was going up, homicide was going up, drug addiction was going up. You pick the measure of quality of life. They were all collapsing and are to this day in Kansas. And so what did Sam Brownback do? Did he say, gee, I guess this experiment isn't working. We should go back to the FDR stuff that actually has been proven to work? No. He fired the guy and closed the office who was keeping track of the statistics, and he took them off the state website. So now you've got climate change deniers coming into the Trump administration, and they're saying, they're trying to say, there's no such thing as climate change, and if there is, it's got nothing to do with people, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. And how do we know about climate change? Well, one of the principal ways we know about it is NASA satellites that are measuring it, and ocean measuring stations all around the world. And so the guys coming into the Trump administration are saying, let's cut the funding for these programs. We don't need no stinking satellites. We don't need no stinking weather measurements. We know this stuff is just a lie. It's a hoax made up in China, to hurt American competitiveness. That's what Trump tweeted a couple of years back. And so, we'll just stop the satellites. So this is astonishing. Jerry Brown, the governor of California, he says, you guys do that? We'll launch our own satellites. Because climate change is affecting California in a big way, from wildfires to drought to, you name it, to loss of snowpack in the, what's that mountain range that runs through Southern California that is the main water source? In any case, there's a mountain range that runs there, and they have glaciers. And those glaciers, they build up in the winter and they melt down in the summer. They don't melt down to nothing, but you get snow melt in the summer. And, up near Truckee and all that part of California. And they've had so little snowfall that the glaciers are starting to vanish, and they're melting too. And when they finish melting, there will be no more water in the rivers, at least part of the year. And that's going to be a screaming disaster. And so Jerry Brown is like, if you guys aren't going to keep track of this, if you're not going to monitor what's going on, if you're not going to keep us safe, if you're not going to at least give us information to keep us safe, we will do it ourselves. But meanwhile, over at the Department of Energy, first of all, the Trump administration asked for a hit list of everybody at the Department of Energy. Rick Perry's going to run it now. Everybody at the Department of Energy who has anything to do with global warming at all, right? Have they been to a conference? Did they write a paper? Are they doing research? We want their names. And the DOE is saying, no, we're not going to give them to you. Now, after January 21st, they won't be able to say no anymore. But so far, they're saying no. And in the meantime, what they're doing is they're taking all that government data, and I'm not even sure this is legal. They're taking all this government data and they're stashing it on thumb drives and hard drives and whatnot to get it out of the building so that when the Trump administration comes in, we'll still have the data. It's amazing.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's like, this is like the Catholic Church in Galileo. You know, it's like the earth is flat, the earth is the center of the universe. These are the people who've taken over the executive branch of government.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and David in New York City. Hey, David, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Hi, Tom. It's good to talk to you again. We had lunch together during the summer. I had made a contribution to free speech.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Nice to hear your voice.
It's nice. It's always nice to hear yours, and I hope you're feeling better after.
I am.
And oh boy, I've been waiting for a while, and the problem with that is that so many topics come up, but not in any particular order. You raised the question about why the Republicans are so opposed to people who administer the money of others being subject to regulation. Well, I'm not sure how that comports with their underlying thesis that human conduct is inherently evil. Don't you think that they would want the evil doers to be at least watched so they don't fleece the innocent?
You're right. You're right.
Not that the idea of contradiction is new to them.
Right. Right. Yeah. Consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. Is that the old?
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Another thing is that you raised the issue of the man who's dying and why does he behave well? I would posit that a conservative would say because he fears the afterlife.
Yeah, you're probably right.
And so, of course, that doesn't explain why atheists don't go around murdering people, but that's the point. You started the show talking about the business of beliefs in religion and in political processes, and in speaking with people who were Trump voters, what struck me was that what they generally did, because Trump did a shotgun type campaign, he would take an issue and say, "This is my position. I'm for no gun regulation. I'm for no abortions. I'm for et cetera." When any one of those issues comported with the belief system of the voter, he would latch on to that as his mantra, and he wasn't willing to give it up, because if he were to give up his belief in Trump, it would mean that his fundamental belief was subject to challenge.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's why people, still, or it's a dimension of why, for example, people still go to church even if they don't believe in an immaculate conception, for example.
Right.
They think, well, that's a nice old story, but I'm still going to go because I kind of get high in church. That's the.
Okay.
Yeah.
The caller who believed in, who advocated for behavioral modification therapy. That's lovely, except you can't do it to every Republican voter.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have to do it systemically. But then, and this is the reason why I wrote The Crash of 2016, David, is historically the thing that has reset this country. And frankly, not just this country. I think you could see this all around the world. But the example that I used was this country. The thing that causes us to reboot in a way that produces a major evolutionary leap forward in terms of the country being more inclusive, more progressive, more kinder, more functional for everybody. It has always been a crash. Whether it was the great crash of 1929, whether it was the crash of 1857, whether it was the crash of 1770, it's an economic crisis provokes then massive political change that is typically positive. And although the short-term consequences of that economic crisis are very painful and very destructive, but that pain is the stimulus to cause people to say, okay, we're going to go beyond the normal. And I think that's why I kept saying this election. I've been saying for 2 years now, this is going to be a change election. In fact, 2008 was a change election, and there hasn't been enough change for people to feel like, okay, we got the change, and so we just want things to stay the way they are, which was more of how it was in the 50s and 60s and like that. So anyway, excellent points, David. I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and nice to hear your voice again. Allie in Arlington Heights, Illinois. Hey, Allie, thanks for being a first-time caller and for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Oh, thank you, Tom. I'm so excited. First of all, I have to thank you. I've been listening to your show for so many years. I'm always learning.
Well, thank you.
And I think that, I mean it. It's so important information. It seems to be such a lacking thing in so many people's lives. What I'm calling about, actually, Victoria kind of stole my thunder, but I was so glad she mentioned it. There's a story, and I saw it first on rawstory.com today, that at least 50 Trump electors were illegally seated electors, meaning they didn't live in the congressional districts for which they were voting, or they lived in a state where it was not legal to hold two offices. And what particularly I make a notice of is Pam Bondi in Florida, their attorney general, where their constitution says you cannot hold two offices. So particularly since he's given Trump, I think you've talked about him giving her money. It's very disturbing to me that she would be an elector, and especially since the electors are supposed to vote the way of the people.
Yeah.
And that, to me, I think there's a conflict of interest, isn't there?
I think it's a screwed up system, Allie. I tell you, it's
at the very least.
It was a system that was designed to protect, by and large, the slave states that had small populations of white people and larger populations of black people who were not allowed to vote. But those white people who ran the states wanted the black people who couldn't vote to be counted for purposes of representation in Congress and in the Electoral College. And so the Electoral College was basically an extension of the 3/5 compromise, that allowed them to count 3/5 of the slave population as if they were voting people for the purposes of determining how many representatives you would have in Congress. And, it should have died out when slavery died out. Arguably, it never should have been created in the first place. But the Electoral College is something that we've got to dump. I'm familiar with the 50 Trump electors who are not a legitimate story. It's migrated around the internet. It's on Alternet now as well. It appears to be solid. But that said, people are protesting, but I don't think that I don't think we have seen yet any kind of magic bullet that's going to undo this election. We're just going to have to, prepare for President Trump and instead look forward to, for example, the 15th of this month is a Sunday. There's going to be rallies all across the United States led by Democratic elected officials, essentially anti-Trump rallies or pro-democracy, small d democracy rallies. And I would encourage you, I don't know if Arlington Heights is represented. I don't know if you're represented by a Democrat or Republican in the House. In the Senate, I believe you have one of each.
But Tammy Duckworth, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You have two Democrats. So you may want to call their office and ask, okay, January 15th, there are events happening all over the country, and I'd like to show up or at least know about it. Are you going to be at one of these, and when and where are they? And in fact, I'd like to encourage everybody to do that, to call their elected officials, because this is a big deal, this January 15th thing. And I know that Chuck Schumer and Senator Sanders and some others in the leadership of the Democratic Party are trying to make this an every month thing, an ongoing movement. I
hope so, because I think this is the biggest thing is that the Democrats dropped the ball on was the messaging and the down ticket involvement. I feel a lot of people do feel estranged. I mean, we started off doing exactly the kind of things that you're talking, being so involved, and that kind of dropped off.
Yeah. And so it's time to get back involved. I mean, it's voting isn't enough. Allie, thank you for the call. Thanks for raising a really important issue. We'll be back with more of your calls my thoughts, and the news of the day after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
15 minutes before the hour, back with your calls right now. And welcome back. Let's see here. Connie watching Free Speech TV on DirecTV in Texarkana, Texas. Hey, Connie, what's on your mind today?
Hey, it's the first time I've called, but I've been watching for several months.
Well, thank you.
Well, my father was born in Standing Rock in 1883, and my granddaughter and I got to go up there, and then we got blocked when we went into town of going back. They wouldn't let us back in.
Oh, my.
And the thing with so much of this, I'm a person who loves people and loves to study. And I think the UN is basically based on the Cypress cylinder. And the Zoroastrian people have been treated actually worse than my people have. But every time I meet them, they're some of the most peaceful people that I've ever met.
The Zoroastrian people.
The Zoroastrian Persian, some of them are in India, in northwest India.
Right.
But I've met them over, because I've worked with people. I was a Navy wife for 23 years.
Uh-huh.
And so I've met people all over, and I've worked nonprofits all my life.
Yeah.
And it's just seems like we've lost what the true teachings were of peace and harmony and caring for each other that Zoroastrian teachings teach.
Yeah, and not just them. I mean, there are many, and out of that same region, for example, the Sufi teachings
right,
that also come out of Shia.
That's very similar to theirs, but
right.
They're the ancient religions, and they taught the more peaceful ways than what we're doing. You know?
Yeah. We've lost it, and then on top of that, you get these prosperity gospel preachers who are on TV saying, "Send me money because I need $10 million to buy a new private jet." I mean, it's the perversion of religion and all these things. It's just extraordinary. Connie, I have to move along, but your point is very well made. Thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing it with us. David in Seward, Pennsylvania. Hey, David. Thanks for being a first-time caller. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon.
Hey.
I had a couple of questions. One was with the Electoral College, does not the House of Representatives have to certify their vote?
They do. It'll happen, what? It doesn't happen in 1 minute.
Sometime this next
happens
week.
On the 6th. On the 6th. Yeah, I'm not sure the date, but I think it's going to happen tomorrow. But yeah, Congress has to certify that vote.
Decertify since there are all these Trump voters that were not legal, could they not decertify it?
They could, and there's an argument being made for that. My guess is that if it was acknowledged that those 50 people were illegitimate electors, they would simply be replaced by legitimate electors who would still vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You know. So.
My other question was about the emollients with Trump. As soon as he takes the oath of office and says, "I do," he's in violation. Am I right?
Well, that's debatable. If he was anybody else in the federal government, in the executive branch of the federal government, yes. But the president, the Constitution says the president can't take emoluments, in other words, gifts from foreign leaders, which is they've got this whole system now for when presidents are given gifts. But how that's defined and what that's going to mean is going to be, I suspect, is going to provide a lot of fodder for a lot of lawyers for a lot of years. I don't think that Trump is going to get nailed on this right away. David, I got to run, but thank you so much for the call. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Michael in Silver Springs, Maryland. Hey, or Spring, Maryland. Hey, Michael, what's up?
How you doing?
Good.
Hey, I was been thinking
thinking about your statement yesterday. Let the red states be red,
Mm-hmm.
And it's feeding off of that electoral college and the representatives. If every and it's all, going back, I went back to slavery, and the thought is like some correlation with your 3/5 clause. And I thought about all the blacks, Latinos, minorities, LGBT, and even some women that live in those red states. And if they moved to the East Coast or the West Coast, any state that's on the touching the water, and north, everything west of Illinois, north and west of Illinois. Everything east of
Right, the north,
north,
the northeast, yeah.
well, going all the way over to the Illinois.
Okay.
If blacks and those minorities moved out of those red states, they would lose electors. They would lose House of Representatives. They still have their 2 senators. And basically, and I didn't tally up the states, the number of states, but America would be progressive.
Yeah.
In its leadership, in picking the president, because that means Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Florida, all would be blue.
Well, even if nobody moved, if we simply had an absolute, unambiguous right to vote in our Constitution, then you wouldn't have had Chris Kobach and his buddies using interstate crosscheck to knock people off the voting rolls. You wouldn't have all these Republican efforts to prevent people from voting. There's literally millions of votes that were cast in this last election that were never opened and counted because of these Republican voter suppression efforts. And most of those people don't realize that their votes were never even counted. They were given what are called provisional ballots, and they thought that was just a fine thing. They didn't realize it was a placebo ballot. But I think you're onto something, Michael, and I think that America is a progressive nation by and large, and it's so bizarre. Go ahead.
And Tom, now you can see why they always tried to return the slave who was that 3/5 leaving the state. They always tried to get to return them back because they were losing their actual power in numbers to get those House of Representatives and those electors and all that stuff. And now those 3/5 are now one. And if they all, because I don't see why I'm black. I don't see why my folks stay in them red states because their votes don't count. They will never count. They will always be any kind of laws affecting their lifestyle, their right to vote. So why even stay there?
Yeah. Well, people have family, people have roots, people have, it's why it's kind of a good or an interesting thought exercise, but I really wouldn't want to inflict it on the country because people will get hurt. A lot of people just simply can't afford to move,
Yeah, because a lot of us left in the Great Migration.
Yeah.
Just to get away from that terror and that the laws and the politics there. Yeah. We left, and it could happen again.
Yeah.
It could possibly happen again, and it would be for the greater good for America and those individuals.
I think you may be right. Michael, thank you for the call. Very interesting analysis. Seriously, very interesting analysis. Rich in Cedro Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's up? Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Hey, no problem. Hey, Tom. I was raised a good little Calvinist in the Christian Reformed Church, no less. And every Wednesday night as a teenager, we had youth meetings. I remember a series of studies we did on cults and mind control. Ironically, I was being brainwashed at the time, but that's neither here nor there. But dealing with people who have gone through a cult-like brainwashing experience, say like a conservative voter, they say what they'll do when they're confronted and cornered is they'll back into a mantra, reciting their credo, which is what you get with Crazy Uncle and his Fox right-wing talking points. And the best way we were told to deal with this situation is just straight up denial, to crack the egg, say, no, that's not right, that's not true, and just keep hammering at that and disrupt that kind of brainwashed cult-like thinking, just like.
It's deprogramming, basically. It's an old friend of mine, Hilly Zeitlin, used to work with Ted Patrick, the famous deprogrammer. They used to kidnap people out of cults and deprogram them. And and that's basically the strategies that they would use, Rich, is, reground people in reality, reconnect them to family, community, and essentially the real world, and then show them the fallacy of the belief system that they had bought into. Rich, I got to move along, but good point. Thank you. Susie in Vaughan, Washington. Hey, Susie, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. I'm sorry I don't have an accent. This would be much more interesting.
Okay. Can you take me off the speakerphone, Susie?
What's that?
Can you take me off the speakerphone?
Hell yeah. Sorry about that.
That's quite all right. Thank you.
So what I wanted to say is that when all this stuff erupted and I was like out of my mind, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I finally found my own niche, and whenever people find it, they're going to love it. But I just posted an article. I have an in-home business, and it has nothing to do with, anything. But I have a lot of articles on there for my clients, for informative articles about their animal.
Mm-hmm.
And anyhow, I thought this is a great way to do it. And anybody want to read it, fine. If they don't want to use me as their business, then don't. But it was my way of just unloading, and whoever reads it, and who doesn't, does it. But and I'm connecting up with another place at our Evergreen State College, hopefully, and they've got a new program there. And it's just about getting out there, and that's what worked for me. So I'm so happy to hear all these people be so angry and ready and ready for.
So let me get this straight, Susie. If I just to understand, you're saying that you run a small business which has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with pets. But on the web page for your small business, you're offering your political opinions, and that instead of hurting you is helping you with your business.
If they don't want to read it, they don't have to read it, and that's all good. And I'm even going to retitle it a little bit more, because my brother said, well, you might not get a lot of business. And I said, well, that's not the point. The point is I'm not a hypocrite, and I don't want you as my client anyhow.
We used to have,
that way.
When I was in Portland, we had an advertiser, Tom Dwyer Auto Repair, who's arguably the best auto repair in Portland. And Tom supported our local show very well. I mean, he was a real fan of the show and did great help. And I believe he's probably still supporting X-Ray FM, which is now, the heir to that in Portland. And he was just right up front about his politics. He would run ads that said, I'm a progressive, I support progressives, and I'll fix your car. And it worked. People loved it. I think it's fascinating. Susie, good on you. And thanks for sharing that with us, that people can actually be honest about who they are and what they're doing, and you can have a positive outcome from it. Thank you, Susie. Thank you all for being with us today. It's been a fascinating day. It's a fascinating time we live in. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow. And in the meantime, don't forget, first of all, January 15th, contact your local elected Democrats and find out where they're going to be on January 15th. Number 2, be there yourself. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. TomHartmanProgram.com.